board meeting where, just as a point of notation for the record, we're in person in the IMS library. So directors Brian Giannini Upton, Director Tam Ginn,
I can hardly hear David.
and Director David D'Souza are in person. Directors Deborah Lurie and
Can you not hear me?
yes.
I hear like barely a whisper.
Okay. So something else we can do, Andrew? Yeah. Sorry, we're checking on that, Deborah.
Okay.
I took my mask down to speak, but clearly that didn't.
It's not the mask, it's a volume issue.
Yeah. Please bear with us. We're working through the hybrid meeting issues real quick for our first time. Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing. Is that working for you, Deborah?
No, it's no different.
Fred, can you hear David?
I can, yes, I can hear him all right. I mean, it's Deborah is much louder, but David was okay on my end. But
testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, 1, 2, 3.
that's even better than it was on my end. Director Lurie, how about you?
It's better, yeah.
Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, it's manageable.
Tam, can you please do a test real quick?
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Not as well.
Can we just take out our mask? Can we take out our mask when we talk? Can you hear me now?
It doesn't make a difference.
No, it doesn't make a difference. John has a quiet voice.
And Brian, could you do a real quick test first?
I'll use my theater skills to project for you. How's that?
Yeah. Brian's is the best. I assume he's closest to the mic.
He is closest to Mike. Donna, do you want to do a test?
And the loudest.
Deborah, can you hear me?
Eh,
Is it better without the mask?
that one was, yeah. Is there a way to move the mic? I assume the mic is attached to the computer or the camera.
Correct.
All right, well, we'll just figure it out.
We do have transcription closed caption on, so that hopefully will help.
Mm,
The captions seem to be pretty accurate, actually.
it's not showing on mine. Maybe I have the setting wrong. Here it is. Okay. You guys aren't waiting for me, are you?
We want to make sure everybody can hear.
We're just making sure the camera is plugged in properly and things like that. A little bit of electrical stuff going on here.
Cool.
We should be.
I'm back. And Maggie Ty's back. We're waiting for Maggie Ty.
Maggie Ty, can you hear us?
I can, but it's very faint. Like I can turn the volume way up on my computer, but then everyone else is going to be like shouting in my ears. Say something. I just turned it way up.
Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, 1, 2, 3.
Okay. Now that's very clear, but Deborah, say something. You're on mute.
Yes, that was my problem too.
Yeah.
We do have some mics that we have for classrooms that we were discussing. We wanted to get those. So we'll test those for the next meeting as well. But probably in a smaller room, we should get all that feedback. So it could be a little bit of mic sharing, which we turn on and off like at the council. We don't have ones like that. I think.
So I positioned the microphone closer. It's the same camera we used the last meeting, which picked up audio fairly well. But I'm gonna get the microphone for you
I
guys.
think it's a fan too.
And
The fan probably like, maybe turn off the fan. Yeah. We'll do without it for now. Yeah.
Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, 1, 2, 3.
Is that better?
How's
maybe,
that
Todd?
working?
It's good enough. It's a little better.
Okay, thank you for your patience. Hopefully we can get started. Just to continue where I left off. For the record, in person at the middle school library is Brian, Tam, and myself. And online on video, attending the meeting is Deborah and Maggie Ty, as well as Fred Rundle, Assistant Superintendent, Deputy Superintendent. So with that, we'll call the meeting to order at 6:10 officially, and I'd like a motion to establish the agenda.
So move.
Is there a second?
A second.
I have a moved by Brian, seconded by Tam. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And with that, we will move to the superintendent report.
So we have a few things tonight for you. First of all, some introductions. Here to meet the board for the first time is our executive assistant, who is working currently right beside Kendall, literally and figuratively, but will be taking over come September 1. Michelle Mueller. Michelle, will you stand up and wave and maybe even come to the cameras? So welcome, Michelle. Go stand with us.
Hi, welcome.
Nice to meet you. Thank you. We are excited to have Michelle. She has all of the qualities and characteristics that are essential as an executive assistant. She has a background and a degree in accounting, so she's super detail oriented and will keep us all on track when it comes to keeping our policies lined up. So thank you for coming tonight. We're so glad you're here. You're welcome. Thank you. I also want to introduce briefly, we'll have a more formal introduction in September, but our new junior student representative to the board attended tonight to learn all things about MISD School Board. Andrew Howison is here with us at the back, just learning. Welcome, Andrew. We're glad you're here. We would like to update the board on a few projects that are ongoing, as well as give you an update on where we are with Department of Health, the governor's mandates, and anything from OSPI. So let's start with something we're really quite excited about with our wonderful collaborative partner, Parent Edge. Fred has set up and is engaged with them in a project for each of our schools called I Wish. Fred, tell us a little bit more about this project.
Sure. Thank you, Superintendent Kolaski. Last spring, actually, Michelle Ritter and Lori Cohen-Sanford approached myself and Learning Services with an idea. And that idea was based on a national dish. And the premises behind it is to give students and parents voice, especially as they're coming back to school. We know our families know more than ever about how their own children learn, having had a front row seat with that for so many months. And so as students are coming back and they're also reflecting, we're going to be engaging in a project called I Wish, and it's going to give students and parents an opportunity, that sentence stem in many different ways to really express of I wish this about school, or I wish my teachers knew this about me. And so we'll be compiling all of those at the various levels to really come up with a tapestry of wishes that we can take forward and then learn from as a school district. The idea really coincides nicely with a broader theme for the school year. We'll be sharing a lot more with the school board when we convene with you in September and we give you the district improvement plan. We will continue with our theme around breaking down and identifying barriers. But one of the things that we're going to really focus on this year is thinking about the identification process of those barriers and knowing that the most important voice in that are the students themselves. And so this project, along with an initiative called Knowing Every Student by their name, strength, and need, will really fit together as we launch this school year. So we're really excited about this and appreciate the ongoing partnership with Parent Edge, our PTA, and our entire school district.
Any questions about the I Wish project? So next, Fred did a nice segue into our leadership team retreat that we had last Thursday and Friday. Our entire leadership team, all of our site administrators, all of our department leads, and we really did have a focus. We were in person at the high school with all of the mitigation strategies in place, and we really spent a great amount of time focusing on discussions around knowing our students and, as leaders in the district, our staff by name, strength, and need. Dr. Rendell led several discussions with the team in this arena. We did a fair amount of activities of getting to know each other through some I just forgot the word I wanted to say. Some events that we did together, some team building kinds of activities, telling the story of our name. Fred, would you like to elaborate more on the name, strength, and need, and anything else from the retreat that was a highlight?
I think a huge highlight and a thank you is to our leadership team. In years past, we've asked them to give up one day, and this year we asked our leadership team to give up 2 days so we could really dive into the work and think about leadership opportunities that are ahead of us as we bring our students and our families back into our schools. And then our instructional leadership team with our principals and our learning services team, Superintendent Kolaski, and then a number of our coaches who also joined. We just came off of a 3-day Summer Leadership Institute and had 3 incredible days with speakers from all around the country. There were student speakers, professionals in the field, parent speakers, and this was hosted by our partners with Inclusive Schooling. And so I think, the highlights for me are really the clear alignment and direction of where we're trying to go to make sure that all of our students feel connected to school, feel engaged in school, and feel included. And one of the quotes that I took away from the experience was, we really need to focus on seeing our students. We can think of it as a deficit and how much they missed out on during the last year and a half, or we can focus on all the assets that they're bringing forward and the tenacity made a pandemic, and what are their strengths and their skills that they're bringing forward. So we're really going to be trying to focus on the positive, but also paying close attention to our students' needs, socially, emotionally, and academically.
Fred, just so you know, you're breaking up a fair bit. We weren't catching all of your words, so I don't know if you want to make an adjustment there at all. And your video's getting a little bit grainy as well. I think something that Fred didn't mention about what was our ILT retreat for our instructional leadership team with the Inclusive Schools virtual 3 days together. It was certainly schools across the nation, but also internationally as well. There were speakers from other countries. Bunch of the work that the presenters do is in other countries as well. Two of them talked about they always see each other in airports prior to the pandemic when they were going and coming from the different inclusionary and inclusive school practice conferences that they were attending. I think two of them mentioned, I think it was Switzerland was the last place they had seen each other in a hotel. So that was really reaffirming. We all took copious notes with lots of different quotes, and Fred did a great job of setting up a Zoom for all of us to meet together as a team to kind of debrief. That's something you do a lot when you're at a conference. You'll meet in the hallway or meet for lunch. So we did that as well as a team, just to get together and say what really impacted you in the morning session, what really impacted you in the afternoon sessions. So we learned lots, had lots to think about and implement with our teachers. It was very exciting to have our coaches there with us as well. And I know that we're going to have many of our teachers who will be attending the Inclusive Schooling Academy, which is later this month. It will also be virtual, but it will give opportunity for even more of our educators to participate. Anything else, Fred?
No, I think that covers it well. I made a slight adjustment. Am I better on the audio and visual now?
Yes, repeat your quote so we can hear it in full.
Sure. As we open our schools this year, we want to see our students for who they are at heart, what is in their mind, and what drives their spirit.
That being said, we're going to give you a quick update on what we know, probably as much as you've received because we've tried to forward it on to you. When it comes to new recommendations and guidance from the Department of Health and OSPI, there was a new Department of Health update that just came out Tuesday that did summarize and include athletics and extracurriculars. And so staff is diving into that to make sure that our overall plan as a district complies with all of that. Aaron and our bargaining teams are working closely with our labor partners, MIA, as we're getting ready to move forward into the school year. I think we sent out a community message to everyone saying, here's what we know at this time. Masks are mandated for all classrooms, everybody who's in school, regardless of vaccination status. We have lots of strategies that we will continue. All of the posts that you see with hand sanitizer are not going away and will be continuing to be filled, and we will continue to have an emphasis on hand hygiene. The lunches was a huge barrier last year. We think we have eliminated a lot of those barriers. Our custodians and our leadership team has worked really closely in figuring out how do we do lunch in a safe way for all students. We'll be using every bit of square footage in our cafeterias, particularly the elementary. We'll be using our stages, adding some tables, adding some dividers at the tables, so that students will still be able to see each other, still be able to chat with each other. Those are the important things at lunch while they take their mask off to eat lunch. So those are probably the big mitigations that we are working on at this time. Anything, Fred or Aaron? I'm looking at the two of you because I know you've been diving deep into this as well.
I think the biggest thing, do you want me to stand up probably, sorry. I think the biggest thing to emphasize is all students and staff during school, regardless of vaccination status, will still be wearing masks while indoors. But vaccination still, it's good for your health, and it can provide some benefits to both students and staff even now when you have to wear masks, and that it can shorten the amount of time you're quarantined, or you would not even have to be quarantined if you're asymptomatic despite being a close contact. So we're still encouraging those who are eligible to inform themselves and consider whether or not they should be vaccinated. And other things is we are committed, both MIEA and the district, to opening the school full-time 5 days a week in person. And we're negotiating that and moving forward. And I think we're all just looking forward, teachers and others alike, to seeing our kids back in school all day long. So I think it's going to be successful, and we will make sure that parents, staff, and the community is aware of what mitigation measures that we will have to do. They will continue to be layered, as Superintendent Pelosi said. It's a layered approach. You've got vaccinations, you have masks, you have physical distancing, hand washing, all of those things help, and we were very fortunate last year. We didn't have a single spread of COVID within our schools, and we're looking forward to having that again. That's our goal. So we want to return to a safe and happy and healthy return to school. Do you have any questions?
Anything to add, Fred?
Nothing to add on to that. I think we're poised and ready, and we will continue to adjust and respond accordingly. But as both of you said, getting the students back 5 full days is absolutely where we will be come September 1st.
And we have one more separate topic that we want to talk to you about. Erin has been working again with some of our parent partners in a project that's been ongoing for several years, but we believe that they found what is going to be a great resource called Say Something. Erin, take it away.
So Say Something Anonymous Reporting System is part of the Sandy Hook Promise, and it is a way for students and members of the community to anonymously report threats of violence against self or others or the school. So it's very sort of narrowly tailored to threats of violence and harm, but it is an anonymous reporting system. It's a great opportunity for us because we are a small district. It's difficult for us to man an anonymous system 24/7, 365, 7 days a week, right? And that is something that the Sandy Hook Promise and the Say Something anonymous reporting app does. Their reporting is monitored, as I said, 24/7, 365 days a year. They have on hand so trained crisis counselors, depending on what's reported, and they are going to work with the school to sort of train our administrators on how to respond to some of these reports, and then they are they'll also give our students 3 different ways to respond if they have concerns, and they will come with that with some training on what to look for, especially on social medias for our kids. This is focused for our middle school and high school students, so this isn't an elementary program, but they can report via phone, app, or web-based application, so on the internet. And the idea is to help our kids recognize the signs. I will say, when we had some threats of violence against the schools in the past, people used this system even though it was not something that the district was officially subscribed to. This anonymous reporting system is active in over 120, I think it is, school districts, in addition to 2 states, so both North Carolina and Pennsylvania, which is where I most recently moved from before I came here. They have that in all of their schools there. So it's quite a exciting partnership. We think it gives another sort of layer, and something that it offered that other options didn't is that they really do emphasize that you want to be an upstander, not a bystander. and that they want to support those connections with adults, which is something we as a district has always wanted to have a trusted adult. So it isn't the idea that we want to push everyone to an app. It's just another vehicle. So it is, and it really is focused on social emotional learning and aligns with the CASEL standards. So it is a holistic approach that is just giving another avenue as opposed to displacing those personal connections that we hope all of our kids have with someone, some trusted adult in our school. So we're excited about that. We're going to be doing training with our secondary administrators initially in September, with more sort of in early 2022, so January, with a rollout by spring of 2022. And it's something that every kid can be pushed out to their iPads thanks to our IT department. So they will have a way to report this if they have concerns. And it's something that will be monitored and manned, which is something we couldn't do with some of the other options. And thanks to our parents, especially Ashley Klein, but there are many others through Parent Edge who brought different options. We've been looking for a solution, and I think we found one that really meets our interests given our sort of limitations and size. Do you have any questions?
I think that sounds wonderful. Are there any costs for this year?
There is not a cost to the district in that it is funded by sponsorships. I know that, so it's going to be a free to us, but I believe some parents are looking to raise money for the overall organization to sort of offset the cost of our district, but it's not something the district has to pay for. But it's something that I hope would be a benefit. I mean, quite honestly, I would prefer that no one ever have to use it, but at least it is an option should somebody find themselves in that situation.
Thank you very much. I think those are both great services around the reporting anonymously. I think it's certainly a great venue for students to be able to do that through the phones and iPads they have in hand. I also appreciate the feedback around the reopening of schools. And one question on that would be, lunch was always a concern around this. Do we think that's understood and under control for all the grade levels?
We believe so. Like I said, the direction was the first priority is to have all students in person all day, 5 days a week. And so the physical distancing that was originally presented by Department of Health was when masks are off, you have to be 6 foot. Now they've worded it much differently, saying as much as possible, a 3 foot is even reasonable. And then again, we did do lunch in the hybrid with our middle school and our high school, so we'll still be using that model and just opening lots of spaces for kids to be able to spread out for lunch. Lunch service will look different. Our Director of Food Service, Carol Buss, I interrupted her just yesterday on a call with OSPI as to what are the parameters that they have to deal with. Things are going to have to be individually wrapped. Salad bars are still not going to be there, but it's spacing kids out and reminding them of when you take your mask off, that's a time when you have to be conscious of others around you. And the dividers for the elementary, we don't have them in yet, but we're getting them in soon. And I believe next week, Tony's going to do a test with them, and we'll make sure we get lots of pictures out on social media so people can see here's some of the mitigation pieces that we're putting in place for lunchtime, particularly with our youngest students.
Thank you.
And I think that is all for the superintendent report, unless there's any other questions. Maggie, Ty, and Deborah?
Yes, I just wanted to ask about lunch service. Are we going to be ending the free lunches for kids up to 18? That program, has that kind of come to a natural end now?
Ty's going to answer this one.
I'm just gonna come up.
Okay.
And while he's doing that, I just want to recognize our facilities personnel. Tony Kuhn is the Director of Maintenance and Operations, as well as our custodians and our administrators for being very creative. And really it has been a partnership with MIA to figure out how we can make this work and what's best for kids, keeping them at the forefront so that their health and safety is, of course, of most important, but also recognizing their social emotional needs are best served by being in person. So thank you to them.
So this coming school year, the 21-22 school year, OSPI and the federal government have made it possible for all districts that are on the National School Lunch Program, free and reduced program, will be able to feed their students for free. So if your building is on the program, you can feed them. So all 4 of our elementaries and the middle school are on the program. They will be free. Our high school is not on the program. Hasn't been on the program for several years. And because we just don't have enough students to make it fiscally viable to run that building on the program. And it's been part of the Chartwells contract, a partnership with Chartwells, that they provide assistance to those families as part of their contract to us and part of the services that they provide to the community. So if you need food, we will never turn a child away. That's part of it's in the law. It's part of our policy. We will never deny a child need, irregardless of whether or not the state pays us. That's just what we do. We put our kids first, right? Elementaries and the middle school are free. The high school will still be going back to 1920. The bulk of the year will be paid as it used to be. So.
But there will still be restrictions for some of the service because of the COVID safety restrictions that apply to food service.
Understood. Thank you.
And any questions from Deborah?
No questions, thank you.
Okay,
All right.
we're done with
We are
superintendent.
done with the superintendent report.
Thank you. So just a real quick check, I'm making sure everybody on hybrid can understand us appropriately and things are working. Do I just get a thumbs up?
It's working great. And when people go up to the microphone or up to the whatchamacallit, what do you call that thing? Yes, the podium, thank you. That's working great. I can hear everyone really clearly.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you very much. Just as another point for the record, normally Maggie Tai would be presiding over this as board president, but as she is hybrid, I am now doing it, and we will have a discussion later on as to how do we want to handle these hybrid situations regarding presiding over the board and when we move to all hybrid or not. So we will table that till board reports time frame. But now let's move on to partial governance process monitoring. A, board policy 1800, OE6, budgeting and financial planning.
So this is your quarterly update for the 2020-21 budget. Remember that the books for the year are not technically closed yet and don't close until November. So Ty's going to go through the quarterly report before he starts to talk to you about the budget planning for the next school year, 21-22. Go ahead, Ty.
All right, so these financial reports are for the month ending June 30th. We just barely got the statements from the county treasurer to close July this week, so we've been working on closing July. So while it's been a while, this is as up-to-date as information as we can give you. So the first, I'm not.
Can you just pull it up on your computer?
Yeah. So the first slide is a comparative chart of the revenues from the last several years to where we are year to date, fiscal year to date. So Andrews, if you could. So while we had earlier in the year projected state funding shortfalls, the legislature came through, woohoo, and provided us the sufficient revenues to carry us through the rest of the year. So we received the bulk of that money in May and June. We got another chunk in July, and we'll receive a much smaller chunk in August. But when you look at the purple graph for state funding, that's why it's almost comparable to the last several years, is because the state provided those stabilization funds. They provided the ESSER matching funds, that $250 per student, or $500 per student, excuse me. And then the transportation stabilization and enrollment stabilization. So that's why we're seeing a much higher state funding allotment than we had anticipated. If we can go to the revenue slide, any questions, or the expenditures, any questions on revenues? Oh, all right, let's go to expenditures. You can see this year, while we have not been in person, we still had all of our staff that we carried forward from 1920. While we did furlough our transportation staff for a brief period at the beginning of the year until we started ramping up services, bringing our special ed students in and bringing all of our younger students in, and then eventually everyone, we had furloughed them in an attempt to save costs. It saved us a little bit, but not as much as we had hoped. Providing additional services and running those transportation services day in and day out for the majority of the year, it still cost us pretty close to what we would have done in a normal year. However, we did not get funded what we would have received in a normal year. So while our revenues have dropped, our expenditures have remained fairly consistent. As you can see, we did have a little bit less on classified employee costs, but that was offset by higher benefit costs, payroll taxes, retirement contributions went up this year. It's just one of the things that just happens every year. Right? As well as health insurance. We do have staff that go out on leave. We continue to pay for their benefits. So while we're not paying for their salary costs, we're still paying for their benefits, and that's partially why expenditures are up. We had less services needed during the year, so we are fairly consistent with our supplies and services, maybe just a little bit down from where we had thought we would have been. If we can get to the next slide. So this chart is our monthly ending fund balances, and it projects out our ending fund balance at the end of the year. We take monthly data and upload it into the tool that we use called Forecast 5, and provides us the ability to forecast what we think our ending fund balance is going to be. So this is correct data up through June. You see, normally we'll see the two spikes in October and April. Those are the levy collections. And normally it starts to take down slightly. That big bump off to the side in May was the enrollment stabilization and transportation stabilization. And just as normal, we are kind of trending downwards a little bit. But thankfully, all the stabilization dollars and transportation dollars and ESSER matching dollars are helping to push our ending fund balance up from where we had anticipated, about $2 million. We anticipate ending at about $5.6 million, which is about 8.2% of our expenditures for the year. So we are ending in a much better place than we had anticipated. But the thing that we need to remember is that these revenues are one-time dollars. The ESSER dollars and the stabilization dollars, once we get them, that's it. There's no more free money. And the ESSER dollars were given to us with the intention of using them to support learning and recovery, to be a supplement for the ESSER dollars. And that's going to come into play when we talk about the budget. All right, any questions about our ending fund balance, the trends that we're looking at?
So one question is around the ESSER dollars. Should that really be, our expectation is we plan on spending it. It's going to go down, and so should that really be included in the fund balance in this type of calculation?
So when we look at this specific chart, I did include part of the ESSER dollars because we will be claiming it at the end of this fiscal year. so it's going to be a reimbursement for us. So it's cash that we're going to be receiving. It'll be actual cash dollars in our bank account because we've submitted the grant reimbursement request to OSPI. When we're looking at the ESSER $3 that we won't receive until we actually spend it and request it from OSPI, we have not included any of that in here. So when we're looking at that $5.6 million ending fund balance, it is only reflecting what we anticipate claiming out of the ESSER dollars for supporting summer school. And we won't know exactly how much of what we're going to be charging ESSER until the end of the August payroll, because it's the payroll cycle of how things time out. So we'll be submitting that claim at the end of August.
So what you're saying is we've already spent the money and
Yes.
we've paid those bills.
Yep.
And this money is coming back in to make us whole again with respect to that. So that's why we're justified in
Yeah.
including it in this graph.
Yeah. So we're only including part of it because we've spent the money and we anticipating getting it back at the end of the fiscal year. The other ESSER dollars that we haven't even started expending yet, we're not including that until we're including it in next year's budget because we anticipate claiming it, but we don't include it in this year's budget because we won't be spending it.
Thank you, that makes sense.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Great.
Grace is no good at math.
Okay. Is this better? Can you hear me? Okay, great.
Just, I have to remind everyone that what Andres has given Ty is the same systems that we purchased for all of our classrooms as part of our remote learning environment, because we knew that people would be masked, and so the strain on the voices. So we have these for everyone. Just be aware.
Okay. Next slide, please. This is just a high-level chart. It's a lot of numbers. It's small numbers. I apologize, but I felt like this information was important to include in the quarterly report. It highlights essentially how we're doing year to date and where we think we're going. And it breaks out the different categories of how we're spending things in terms of, I believe this is objects, apologies. So similar to the chart that we had used, salaries, benefits, services, goods, we are still within the range of where we anticipated. We're still looking at about 95% spending on the budget, which is pretty much consistent with prior years. That's our average. We average about 95% of spending. And it highlights essentially where we had budgeted. We budgeted ending at 3.3 million. We had anticipated, due to the various causes of enrollment loss and other needs, that we would be down around 2 million. And then with state funding, we're back up to 5.6. So all in all, we're ending in a much better place than we had thought this year. We're on trend for spending as if we're a normal year. But we provided the services that we needed. Our kids got what they needed. We got them in the buildings. We got them connected to each other. And we did everything we could in the most amazing circumstances possible. So kudos to the staff, kudos to the district for doing such a great job and for using what we need. Any questions about the quarterly report? All right.
Deborah, Maggie, Ty, any questions?
No, I'm good. Thank you for the explanations.
No questions, thanks.
All right, if we switch to the next. And the remaining pages are just the budget stats reports per fund. Fairly consistent with what we provide to the board every month in terms of what the monthly information is. It's a little bit more detailed. Again, much smaller numbers. It's content context only. If you have the time and inclination to continue reading it, it's there for your pleasure. But at this point, we've covered what we need to.
So, are you ready to move on?
Yes, thank you.
Our next item is our first reading of Board Policy 1800 OE6, Budgeting and Financial Planning. So Todd has a slide deck as well as a guide to understanding the 21-22 budget, which he provides every cycle. And this is the first reading, so it is, of course, a discussion item. At our next meeting, we have the legally required public hearing, which is part of the community linkage that is scheduled prior to the meeting. Ty, are you ready?
Yes.
Before we move forward, I have a point of order. I just now noticed that we did not place public comments on the agenda. Did we have anyone call in for public input or want to provide that? I wanted to acknowledge that before we move forward.
No, we did not.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
As Superintendent Kolosky mentioned, attached to the agenda is the guide to the budget. This is a document I prepare every year. It contains some high-level fiscal information, but also contains descriptions of how our budgets operate, what our funding sources are, how we track our funding, how we spend it, what are some of the restrictions that we have. This year I added some sections about the budget calendar, how we develop the budget throughout the year, and essentially how the cash works, tracking those monthly fund balances. So we're trying to continue to update the guide to the budget so that it's a more useful tool to the community when there's questions about why are we doing this at a specific time? Why are we so concerned about cash flows? Why are we talking so much about levy collections? That there's more information provided within the guide. So I try to provide the guide as a tool that we can use in other discussions outside the board meetings, as well as providing some contextual information about some of the decisions that we put into the budget. So each fund has its own section where I go through and I talk about considerations that we placed in there, about what we do. But for this purpose, for tonight, we're gonna work off the slide deck because it's a little easier to manage than the guide. We don't need to hit all of the specific items that are in the guide tonight, right? So tonight we're gonna talk about, we're gonna have a few topics. We're gonna talk about context, so the historical context of how we're approaching this year. It's an interesting year. We'll go over the individual funds and what we're anticipating for the next year, and then what are some of the implications and outlooks coming up as we look forward. So talking about context, this time last year, when we were meeting to discuss the budget, we were confident that we were going to have an opening school in September. We were going to be in person. We were going to see all those bright smiling eyes on top of the masks. It was going to be great. Didn't work out. Plans of mice and all that stuff. Because we were not able to open in September, in fact, we weren't able to open for several months, we sustained systemic enrollment loss. And when I mean systemic, it's not just across our system, K-12. It was state nationwide. Districts were losing upwards of anywhere from 5 to 14% of enrollment. We lost a little over 6% of our enrollment. That impacted our revenue significantly, as we've talked about throughout the year, and what that means for us. And it exacerbated something that we've been talking about for several years, and that the district is in decline. Our enrollment is declining. And we had started to see that trend 2 years prior. And we have been able to essentially coast with our existing model of staffing and education and programming for several years. What that meant for this last year, as we were going into the year, we had certain perceptions and beliefs and projections about what revenues were going to look like. until reality came in and said, you're going to lose a bunch of money. You don't have the kids. And so we started having concerns about our fund balance and our reserves. And the fact that we rolled over our staffing, essentially, that we maintained that higher model, and about what the resources were going to look like. Federal stimulus, the ESSER dollars, ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3, those were awarded to us throughout the year. It provided a bump in our ability to respond to the situation. The state stabilization funds, sorry, going back to ESSER, we need to call out specifically, they're one-time dollars. ESSER was awarded through Title I formula, which means that it was specifically directed to be more beneficial for districts that receive Title I or Title I designated districts based on a variety of factors, but predominantly low poverty rates. We are not a Title I district. We are one of about 14 districts in the state that are not Title I districts. And so that significantly impacted our ability to collect revenues. Hence, why we got the ESSER matching dollars from the state. That $500 per student floor. If you didn't get $500 per student in ESSER funds, the state would provide additional money to get you up to that $500 per student. That's why we also got the one-time enrollment stabilization to help these districts that were not getting a lot of ESSER dollars, that saw historic enrollment loss, be able to continue operations throughout the year. Our total ESSER allotment is just over $1 million. Surrounding districts are in the tens of millions of dollars. It's just not, we're just not getting a comparable level of funding that other districts receive. Andrew. All right.
And just to reiterate, again, both the federal and the state dollars, the stabilization funding and the federal ESSER dollars are one-time dollars. So even though districts have more than 1 year to spend them, the funds are not coming again.
The other flip side of this conversation that we're having about under enrollment, historic enrollment, and how I mentioned how we essentially kept staffing level, is that we are highly staffed. We have a very rich staffing model. OSPI funds districts on K-3 class size based on a ratio of students to teachers that includes a portion of our special education teachers and a portion of our specialists, so art, music, PE. OSPI funds districts on a range of, you have a window of 17 to 25 that you can still receive funding as long as you're in that window. Mercer Island has not reached 17 in years because we've always come in under 17. In 2019-2020 school year, we were staffed at 16.3. For the 20-21 school year, it was 14.3. So we don't receive additional funding past or when our numbers are below 17. Director Union.
For folks who are curious about that, how do you formulate that ratio?
So we take the K-3 number of K-3 students, and then we take all of the K-3 teachers. We add in a portion of special education that deals specifically with K-3 students, and then a portion of the specialists that also deal with K-3 students. So it's essentially a pro rata allocation of those teachers. We don't include our paraeducators. We don't include librarians, principals, anything like that. It's essentially staff that touch or interact with the students. Then you divide the number of students that you have by that supplemented formula, and that's what you get for class size. So when we say that we had 16.3, we're saying that we had 16.3 K-3 students per staff member that interacts with K-3. So we are well below what the state considers a minimum class size threshold.
Thank you for that clarification. I think a lot of folks, when they think of that, they think actually in the classroom per teacher, which becomes very confusing. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate that you mapped out exactly how that's going to work.
Yeah, no, It's really about what certificated instructional staff interface more with students, because it really is about the certificated instructional staff. And like I said, we don't receive additional funding for below 17. And so when we are at numbers of 16.3 and 14.3, while last year was kind of a fluke in terms of staffing, it is significantly beyond what is sustainable. We made, prior to the state funding coming in, because we didn't get state funding until the absolute end of the state enrollment stabilization, and the state ESSER dollars didn't come in until the very end of the legislative session at the end of May. We had to make decisions early about what we were going to try to do to right size our staff. So we made some reductions in force. We reduced the number of K-6 students. We reduced some of the numbers based on enrollment at the middle school. We eliminated the K-6 or K-5 Spanish program. So we made some very hard decisions about what we're trying to do to right size the district. Then as we were looking at what are the health and safety requirements that are needed to support learning in 21-22, so physical distancing, we have to look at the class size caps that are in our collective bargaining agreement. How many students can we physically fit in a classroom? As well as learning and recovery needs. You know, we have ESSER dollars that we are going to be spending for recovery. So while we reduced staffing, trying to right size, we had to pull a lot of them back to make sure that we were able to provide these services to our students in the coming year. So while we try to right size, what we're actually going to be seeing is we didn't change that much because we're doing what's best for our kids. Additionally, as we're looking at similarities between 2021 and 21-22, we are still going to have health and safety costs. We're still going to have additional PPE costs. Superintendent Klosky mentioned the dividers. I just signed a purchase order for $25,000 for the dividers. We are working with FEMA for round 3 of reimbursements. So it's a continued exercise of spending to try to find safety solutions and make things work. Continued transportation needs. We do not receive full funding in any way, shape, or sense of the form for transportation. 2021, we received significantly less than we normally would in a year. As we move into 1920, we know that we will receive the 21-22. We are going to receive the 1920 transportation allocations in 21-22 to help support it because we had zero right. Like when we did the ridership counts in the fall and the spring, it was 60 instead of thousands. It was 60 because we were only transporting our special education students. So it was significant challenges. But as we are trying to bring our students back into the buildings, we need full transportation services. And so that's something that's coming back up to where it was pre-pandemic. We do not have Metro. We worked extensively this spring trying to negotiate better rates with Metro. And the health and safety requirements for Metro, the physical distancing requirements just were completely impractical for trying to transport high school students versus what we were able to do on our own buses. So we've restructured routes. The transportation director, Patrick Rock, has spent an inordinate amount of time working on scenarios and routes to make it possible to transport all of our students with our drivers with staffing levels that meet 1920. So we are doing our best to keep it in-house, keep costs down, and do it the right way.
The Metro contract, we didn't have it in place for last year during the pandemic, and we won't have it in place for 21-22. Wasn't a complete savings of not having that contract because, of course, Patrick had to add some routes and do some manipulation of the routes to bring our high schoolers in. But last time I spoke to him, and it might be changing a little bit, it's looking like about $150,000 savings by doing our own transportation versus contracting with Metro.
Yeah. So we're doing our best. And then the other thing that we need to consider is post-McCleary. The changes in our levy structure versus our staff compensation. Our staff compensation has gone up over the last 4 years by over 30%. Our level of funding in terms of levies and what we can do with levies has significantly shrunk. So we have less flexibility. And as we are declining, lower enrollment means that we collect lower levy dollars. And so as we're looking out into the future, and we're looking at declining enrollment over time, we have to take into account the fact that our levy collections will continue to decrease as well. And so it's something that we need to take into account, and it's a challenge that we're going to be looking at. We do have a 1-year reprieve for the enrollment-related levies. We can use the 1920 enrollment instead of the 2021 enrollment. So that gives us a few $100,000 extra over the next two fiscal years, because levies are calendar years and they straddle school years. And so we will have some additional flexibility in 21-22 and then in 22-23. So we have some of that, but it's not going to save us.
Just a reminder, the levy formula changed significantly for Mercer Island and some other districts as well. So the amount we were able to collect pre-McCleary versus post is several million.
Pre-McCleary, we were collecting roughly $17 million. Post-McCleary, it's 11. We did receive some offsetting revenues from the state in our general apportionment dollars. However, that has since wound up going specifically to cover staff costs. And not only has our staff costs increased significantly, but with the introduction of SED, the State Employee Benefit Board, which is a state-mandated health insurance pool for every school employee in the state, those costs have also increased over time. And so while we've, over the last several years, been trucking along, making things work and doing it, we're finally starting to see the whiplash of what we're doing. Right, introduce. Yes.
If I could just jump in there, I think it's going to be really important for everyone to keep an eye on the levy a year down the road and 2 years down the road, because we did receive levy stabilization for this school year, as was passed by the legislature, so we can use those numbers. So it's an artificial amount that we'll receive this year. Beyond that, we'll revert to whatever that enrollment is there, and we were already anticipating declines. So I think it's going to be really important in looking at those levies that we get a little bit of a cushion this year to pad the impact of what just happened, or what is happening in the pandemic, but that expires coming out of this. So I think that's going to be really important for people to remember.
Yeah, especially since we are taking our levies to election in February. As we are coming up in the fall months, it's time to start talking about levies, and we're gonna talk about levies till everyone's blue in the face, and you're tired of hearing the word levy. But I cannot stress how important the levies are to our continued survival. Basic state education funding will not see us through unless we see significant curtailments. It's $11 million. It's a significant portion of our budget.
Before you move on, can I just ask a question about the ESSER dollars that are targeted towards recovery? Like, who's setting the guidelines for what counts as recovery? I sort of feel like almost everything happening in the district in the next year is recovery in one form or another, but I'm sure it's not that broad of an allowance.
It is fairly broad in what we can use it for. The federal statutes that gave us the dollars targeted a specific number of things. We can use it for PPE. We can use it for building improvements to provide better ventilation. We can use it for learning intervention services, so hiring more paras for like PALS, the PALS paras, positive behavior intervention specialists, providing, so some of the things that we are going to be doing with our ESSER dollars that are in the staffing plan for next year, we added additional FTE to the library at the high school to create a learning resource center for students. We added additional FTE to the English language learners at the high school, so that those students who do struggle with English and as a second language will be receiving additional support. We will be charging part of our librarians to ESSER, using that additional time, part of their time weekly, to provide intervention services. So we are using our ESSER dollars specifically for staffing who we are bringing in to meet either learning recovery or social emotional recovery needs.
I think it's really important to note, though, that those staffing additions are limited positions. They are not positions that are ongoing, because the dollars are not going to be ongoing. So yes, we have a couple of years to spend the ESSER and the stabilization dollars, and we're going to try to utilize them as best we can, but no more revenue comes, so the expenses have to be aware, so to speak, of those one-time dollars aren't going to be there in subsequent years.
Thank you.
Yeah. Questions so far? All right. Big main point that we're trying to get across. Our fiscal condition will continue to be affected by the pandemic for at least 2 to 3 years. More likely 3 to 4. It is going to be challenging in the next couple of years. As we mentioned before, this slide is our enrollment projections as compared to Dr. Les Kendrick. Dr. Kendrick is a demographer that the district engages roughly every 4 years to do a 10-year enrollment projection. And we use this for facility planning and also as a benchmark for our internal projections. Every year in the fall, except for this last year, because it would not have worked very well, I do a study on the accuracy of our enrollment projections. And normally we are right up there with the accuracy of our internal projections as with Dr. Kendrick's projections. So we use him for multiple reasons. He did a mid-plan update in the fall of 2019 as part of our long-range facility plan. And you can see his lower range projections are declining. In his projections outside of year 25, we start to see some increases. Those increases are based off of Dr. Kendrick's assumptions that the city of Mercer Island will release more multi-family housing permits for construction projects, based off of the King County's demographic plan of how many housing units each community should hold. So he has some assumptions built in about enrollment rising, but that's several years out from where we are now. So for the next several years, both Dr. Kendrick's projections and our internal projections, and I believe that's 2 slides down. Over the next several years, we are looking at enrollment decline. You can see that first purple bar spiking up. That is our projection for 21-22. Back in December and January, we had a study session with the board where we talked about enrollment recovery. What do we think enrollment is going to look like, because we had this huge shift in our student enrollment. We wanted to kind of receive your input before we projected anything. I am pleased to say that we are at enrollment. We are at projections. I worked with our student data coordinator over the last 2 weeks to get updates as to how many students are enrolled and have enrollment applications that are in process and haven't yet been processed. we are at projections. I believe the number was 4108. We projected 4110. So, and because we are opening in the fall, come what may, we will be open. We don't anticipate losing any more students. Knock on wood. Well,
No jinxes.
no jinxes. Superintendent Reichel hasn't changed his description of if you don't open, you don't get money. So there is, as far as I know, we are still going to be open. So we are coming in right where we thought we were going to be. Awesome, good for us. Next couple of years, we're declining. I hope that trend reverses, but we can't hear teachers on it. So as we're looking at enrollment for the next couple of years, we know that we need to make some additional right sizes to our staffing model. Andreas, can you go to the? So as I mentioned, enrollment is right at projections. System wide, but we haven't gotten back to where we were pre-pandemic. We aren't recovering. It's still a huge drop in where we were. We ended over 1920. We ended at over 4,300 students. It's a huge shift from over 4,300 to 4,110. That's almost $2 million revenue loss. As we're looking at what we're putting into the budget for 21-22, we are resuming our regular services and activities. Transportation will be back to where it was. Lunch services will be back to where they were. We're going to have recess. We're going to have bus pick up and drop off. I mean, we're going to have, it's going to semi-normal school year. Hours are going to be the same. Services are going to be the same. Some things may not be the same in terms of field trips or, the number of lunches that our kids have, but they will be in the buildings. Specialized needs and services. When Governor Inslee required all students to be in person this spring, he based that proclamation off of the mental health needs of our students. And it's not just mental health, it's social emotional needs. We are seeing that as we move into this next year, the need for specialized interventions has exploded in terms of what our students need to succeed and to even get into school. And so we are, the costs for specialized services and interventions is increasing, as well as the legal costs that we're facing. We've had significant legal challenges this last year. Partial causes of that are the absolute inundation that we have had with public records requests. It is unreal how much effort and time and money we have put into responding to public record requests. And we provide a certain portion of those costs and hours to the board every year as part of reporting. But this year has just been amazing in terms of what has been sent to us in terms of information requests. So our ability to handle that in-house is incredibly limited. And so we do need to reach out to law firms and say, hey, will you help us process these requests? Will you help us redact documents? Special services. Inflationary costs. Oh, Director Virginia.
In reference to the public records costs, I know that we'll review that data and be published in December on our typical calendar. But there's a clause in there that says it can be reported monthly if needed. Do you think that the volume of public records requests has hit a point where it might need to be reported more frequently than just the annual report in December, or are we still within that window?
Yeah, I think that would be a full board decision if the board felt like they wanted that reporting to be more often than annually. We would certainly be able, we would have to find staff time to make sure that it's updated and correct. So it might mean some contracting of that as well. But we certainly, if the whole board determined that within that operational expectation, we did that more than annual report to the board.
As I recall, where we left that kind of last time was really if human resources felt that there was some anomaly or something that was so out of what would be typical that might tip that as opposed to the board necessarily needing to do that. But I guess that was my question is, have we hit a certain tipping point where we might expect to see that, or are we still, it's heavy but still within?
It's heavy in that we are having to contract out with a variety of legal counsel outside the district, both for specialized services, as Ty mentioned, just because of the volume. Much of it we are handling in-house. Michelle has become quickly trained up and has also been doing a lot of that work. In fact, will be listed as the public records officer. If she isn't already, she will be in the near future on our website. But much of it needs that legal set of eyes to take a look to make sure that we've protected anyone who is making those requests, particularly because we're dealing with children, with students. So sometimes a lot of the requests come in, end up being verbal, and so then they're not reported in the report that we give to the board because that's a whole separate category. Erin, anything else?
Yeah, so that was going to be my one comment, is that the cost of processing records requests, there's two different kinds. There are public records requests, which would appear on your report, but there's also FERPA requests, which are those requests made by parents related to their students. And both can be quite labor intensive. And this year, I think we've seen an increase in both, which I think we have touched on in multiple meetings. But there's certainly, I think, been a greater increase on the FERPA side. I think just, and that's part and parcel to, I think, the pandemic spurs some of that. So that wouldn't be necessarily captured on that report.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. That's a good question. Yes, thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Inflationary costs. Staffing costs are going up. Material costs are going up. Supplies and transportation costs. Inflation is rampant right now, and so as we move forward, our costs are just going to increase over time. And our changes, the inflationary measures that the state uses to fund us, is usually at a lower level than what true inflation is. We get funded on IPD, and when we look at the cost of goods that we purchase, it's CPI, Consumer Price Index, right? IPD is usually a couple points lower. And so the funding doesn't always necessarily match what's going on. So that's going to be a challenge moving forward. New legislative mandates, lead water testing. It will cost us probably about another $50,000 a year to test every water outlet in all of our buildings multiple times. Each time we do it is going to be about $50,000. So that's going to be a cost ongoing. Professional development requirements. The second round of assessments, student achievement assessments. That's another cost that we have to deal with this year. And then audit requirements. The time it takes staff to adjust to all of the additional audit requirements, whether it's performance or program reviews from OSPI or fiscal audits from the state auditor's office, the level of complexity for what we need to do continues to increase. And compliance requirements around special education are just growing as well.
I think the board is aware of these. We frequently call them the unfunded mandates that come from the state level. It's not that we don't agree with them and think that they're wonderful ideas for our students and for our facilities, but again, the cost then gets dropped to the district level and there are no funds that are attached. There's a little bit of funds that comes with professional development when they added some days in, but there isn't funds for covering all staff or to the extent of the mandated trainings that we have to do those days. There's not enough time in those days to do them all. So They are certainly, I can tell you, at least in the 2 states I've been in, unfunded mandates are just something you have to kind of say it is what it is, but it does impact our local budget.
And then COVID-related costs, health and safety, I mentioned this before, it's gonna keep going. We have to deal with it. Entries. Main point, 21-22 is essentially a perfect storm of conditions where with the reopening of schools, the need for learning recovery, and we were not able to fully right size as we had intended because of these additional needs that are popping up. We're gonna have to spend additional money. We're gonna have to dip into resources. Our enrollment revenues just aren't going to grow and where they were. But we cannot, our priority this year is the welfare and benefit of our students. That is our priority. And we're putting our money where our mouth is this year. And so as we look on the next slide, we anticipate revenue, we anticipate starting fund balance of $5.6 million. We anticipate revenues of $65.57 million. We anticipate spending at about $72,700 or $72,700,000. When you put all that together, it brings an ended projected fund balance of $400,000. Remember, going back to the quarterly budget, our trend is we spend 95% of what we budget. But we have to budget certain things in the budget. We have to include them either for payroll related reasons or for contingencies. When we look at 95% of the spending, the actual anticipated ending fund balance is about $2 million, which is about a $3.6 million reduction based on what we are anticipating actually providing for our students. So there is, it's scary on paper. It is. We've been working as hard as we can to find ways to cut, to find places to add revenues. You know, looking at everything, have we budgeted this? Do we budget that? Do we think we're going to collect this? Do we think we're going to spend this? So we've worked very hard to try to bring something that is what we feel is actually going to happen, minus that 95%. Questions, concerns for the general fund?
How have we included things like the school's foundation donations in this projection?
So we have retained the school's foundation at about $500,000. Their collections this last year were close to about $375,000. So not as high as it has been in the past, but we are maintaining their projections, our projections for them, pretty consistent with what we've had. We're hoping that with the visible need of what we're doing, trying to get our kids in a healthy place, and doing what we can as a district to support them with where we are, that we'll be able to provide the foundation with good tools that they can use to take out to the community and work with them. But it has been a declining revenue source for the last couple of years.
Do we think there's opportunity to motivate further donations by having specific descriptions of things that could be funded, and we're providing that to them?
Yeah, we have been working with the foundation over this last year about things that we would like to see them fund. We no longer do the Bridge the Gap campaign. The foundation used to help support certain staff across the district. It's not a great practice to use one-time funding dollars to support ongoing positions. It's just not sustainable. It makes it hard every year as costs increase to try to raise additional money to support that.
One of the areas that we've talked at length with them about, Fred and I sit with them, and I meet with them weekly, or monthly rather, at their meetings, and we talk about what are some of the needs, and they were adamant all last year, what do you need in the way of PPE that you can't get, or the things we can provide, and we talked about things like these classroom light systems and some of the other things that were available. But they've also really stepped up in supporting the professional development. Because again, as Ty mentioned, that there's certain mandated ones that we have to do, but there's other professional development that our staff wants to take part in and we want them to take part in, and there is a cost to that. So they have helped extensively with that as well.
And also we've mentioned extracurricular stipends, the additional funds that we pay staff to assist with extracurricular activities. We've also asked them to consider helping to support those costs, as it's technically enrichment. It's something that's not funded under basic ed. We've been doing it with our levy. And as our levy dollars get more scarce, it's getting harder to support that. And so we've been talking with them about what that would look like.
And that's technically not unexpected. So if I'm this year the art club teacher, that isn't guaranteed that I will be that next year. Is something that is renewed every year. So it allows us to use a fund that might not be specifically ongoing from state funds.
And is there any legislative help in the horizon for our local levies and to be able to increase that in any fashion?
We have not heard anything from legislatures. I can tell you that Superintendent Report was very clear in his conversations with superintendents about the enrollment stabilization, that if you are in a decline, this is not coming again, you better start preparing now for that decline, because this is not coming again, and your revenue rather, will be impacted in subsequent years by your declining enrollment. As to the levy conversation, Dr. D'Souza, I know you and I have been trying to boost that along. We brought it up when we've been in conversations with our local legislators. There's not a great response to it, unfortunately, but doesn't mean we can't continue, and you can't continue in those conversations with particularly our local legislators, how dramatically that has impacted us, that change in the formula as a district.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, just building on that, I think it's really important to recognize that not just the Schools Foundation, which is an amazing group, but also our PTAs, and the individual units raise a tremendous amount of money every year to support in many different ways. In funding stuff, not staff, but still in funding that stuff frees up money that can go towards staff.
Yeah.
And then you've got booster clubs, you've got so many different one-time donations every year to the tune of millions of dollars that are supporting our educational program on Mercer Island. It's built on one-time donations that are not sustainable. And so when building these projections and models, to have a reflexive expectation that will always be there to support it, but not being able to project on that and build on and count on that, because that's not a solid foundation that you can build on, I think is a really important conversation to have with our community, and one that is a difficult conversation to have. And then adding into that, when we talk about our levies, our local levies, it's the enhancement levy or the enrichment levy, but 30% of the special education budget comes from that levy. And the frustrating thing that is a conversation that we had through WASDA, both at the Department of Education last year, and we have with our state legislators in the various panels that they have. They've said that, number one, there's an audit finding that says that if they find in the audit that we have spent our levy dollars on basic education, then they can remove that from our capacity in the next year. And how that was dealt with by the state superintendent was, well, but if you've exhausted all of your basic education allocation apportionment, and you need to use additional out of this, then that's no longer basic education apportionment. So there's what has been said in the law and really how it's being interpreted, which are two very different things. But the frustration is we are funding, especially on Mercer Island, so much of our basic education, what should be covered by the apportionment, out of our enrichment and enhancement levy. So it's really difficult to understand that nuance because it's a shifting sand, and it causes issues of misunderstanding, I think, in these budget projections when we're looking out, of really understanding there's a pocket of several $1 million in there that we cannot count on. It would be against our fiduciary responsibility to expect that that money is there. But I think it can cause some miscommunication, not miscommunication, some misunderstandings in how that works. So I think I really appreciate the fact that in this that you're leaning into that, and you're talking about the fact that it's called an enhancement enrichment levy, but it funds so much more than just enhancements or enrichments. Like, it's absolutely necessary for our basic education program.
When looking at our revenue assumptions, we do look at historically what has come in from the foundation. You know, Tri-City budgeted 500,000. We look historically what is safety net come in at, because to not budget it is also not a good practice, because then all of a sudden we get this $800,000 bump. So we kind of look at it historically and then put that in as an average within the revenues as well. But sometimes you have some unexpected special education services that you didn't anticipate that, again, you don't get them until the reimbursement of safety net.
Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox.
No. I mean, this is all very important conversations that we need to be having with the community. I think there's still a lot of misunderstanding and perceptions about how school funding works that I am trying to help educate the community how these things are working and how we're looking at problems. And that's why I'm trying to update the guide to the budget every year to be more instructive of this is why we have levies. This is why the levy is important. This is why we're so concerned about our monthly cash flows. I mean, it's really trying to help the community understand, because the next couple of years, as we look at right-sizing our programs, it's going to get painful. And there's going to be some very hard conversations that we need to have about what do we consider basic ed versus enrichment. And so there's a lot of work that we have to lean into with the community about helping them understand where we're going. Any other questions about the general fund? All right. Let's roll. Capital projects. Capital projects, we all know the capital projects, and I'm going to try to be quick with the rest of them. It's been a long night. Thank you for bearing with me. We had a lot of work to cover. Capital projects is there for facility improvements. We are not looking at minor repairs. This is actually improvements meant to upgrade or extend the life of, as well as technology, infrastructure changes, software, and staff. This year we are looking at turfing the JV field of the high school, putting in some infrastructure to put in lights at the JV field, as well as relighting the tennis courts at the high school. So we're doing some work getting that ready for the next levy cycle, put those lights in. We have some boiler replacements that we need to do in some of the elementaries. It's time. They've been around for a long time. We got to do it. Same with the high school bleachers, the gym bleachers and the curtains. They've been around for a long time. That needs some serious attention. We have some minor roofing projects. I believe we have another elementary that's up on schedule until we're actually able to move forward with acting on the long-range facility master plan and going out for a bond. We need to extend the life of these roofs. So that needs to happen. We're looking at making some changes to playgrounds, especially at West Mercer. We're putting in some capacity for that. We believe that there might be some grant opportunities to work with. So we're going to continue to pursue those. We're looking at a full-scale phone system replacement in the district for next year. So upgrading some of that infrastructure. And then I believe we're still looking at adding more Prometheus boards in the buildings. So that's going to be a larger expense that's coming up out of the capital projects fund. And then the next slide is just essentially the fund balance projections. We believe that we're going to collect about $6.8 million. We projecting about 15 million. We're not going to spend all that. Some of these projects will probably wind up getting bumped just because of timing and schedules, and we have to prioritize everything, but we hope that we can get a lot done this year. So we're looking at about 7.4 million in terms of balance. Transportation vehicle fund and debt service. These are probably the least interesting funds that we have to deal with. I know it's super exciting dealing with bond repayments, but bond repayments are on track. We're doing great. Everything's working fine. Moving forward for next year, we are looking at 2 large buses, 4 small buses, and then a topic of conversation that we need to have is about the transportation vehicle levy. It is up for renewal this year. We can run one transportation vehicle levy every 6 years to help build up the fund balance. We don't believe that we need to do that right now. We have sufficient money within our fund balance to last us several years. It's not our priority right now. One of the things that has come up about the transportation vehicle levy is interest in the community about pursuing electric bus fleet. At this point, we don't think it's viable. Electric bus costs $450,000 versus a regular bus, which is $150,000. You would have to spend well over $1 million tearing out the bus lot, laying new infrastructure for charging stations, and then repaving the bus lot. There's also concerns about the logistical support of a fleet of buses, getting service from qualified service providers. You can't just take it to the regular mechanic because there's no diesel engine, but you're going to have to deal with battery replacements, electric motor replacements, all those things. And so it's the logistical infrastructure that we're just not quite sure is there yet. We don't have enough data from surrounding districts in the state about what does it take to run an electric vehicle fleet. I mean, some districts have a few electric buses. They think it's great, but it's more of a novelty for them at this point.
There's some action happening at the federal level around electric buses and stuff. Is that part of the infrastructure package or a new package they're considering? And that's still pretty far down the road.
Yeah,
and whether or not we would qualify for that as a district is hard to say.
Yeah, I did talk to Director Rock, I think it was 2 days ago, and he had just gotten some messages about some potential grants, but we don't even know what that looks like yet. We don't even know what the funding would look like, what the compliance requirements would look like. And so while we are looking at, do we need to run the levy now? No. Do we want to hold off for a couple of years so that we can continue to use the fund balance that we have gotten from previous levies and do what we need to do, while also looking at potentially acting on electric buses in the next couple of years. So our recommendation is that we don't pursue it now.
Can I clarify that you said that the transportation levy is every 6 years? So if we don't run it this year, we have to wait another 6 years to.
You can only run it once every 6 years, but it doesn't. It's 6 years from when you run it.
Okay.
So
if we didn't run it in 22, you could actually run it in 23 because it's been more than 6 years since you ran it. Okay. But then if you run it in 23, you got to wait 6 years to wait. Okay.
Maybe a better way to say it is you have to wait 6 years from the last time you ran it.
So part of usually I'm not really interested in these kind of things, but part of our goal is to think ahead. And I know that we're during COVID, we want to really prioritize on things, but part of I just think that technology is going so fast that when we balance between putting out a levy and what does it cost us to run a levy and the potential that will bring for us to even have money to lay some of the infrastructure for electric buses that we can pull. We have funding in there, just like during COVID, because we have the technology levy, we can act on it quickly. So part of my concern is if we wait, then when we do have it, it would take us even longer to get the money to be there. And I don't think, the electric bus that something we should buy in the next year or so, but definitely in the very near future, I think it should be a possibility. And so that's where I'm kind of weighing,
if we run the transportation levy, what are we losing? And what are the pros and cons of not running it this year?
So when we're thinking about this in the future, the transportation vehicle levy, we can only use those dollars to buy buses. If we are seriously thinking about redoing the bus lot, make an electric bus site, that would be CapTech levy, because it's a capital improvement, it's a facility. And we can have those conversations. It's a dual track that we have to consider. One is cap levy, the other is vehicle levy. We don't need to run the vehicle levy now, partially because we have all the resources we need to continue for the next several years. We don't need to rush out and get any more money at this point. And I'm a little leery about going out to the public and saying, let's do a levy now and then not spend it for several years. That's my concern of why are you putting a tax on our house that you're just going to sit on until you have this other tax that you've increased to build something and you may not know when you can build it. So there's other concerns in there as well.
I think the other side we've got is doing a levy comes with a cost. I think it's about $25,000 to run a levy. Which is our portion, and right now in February it's shared with other districts, so there's a win to doing it together now. So doing something in 23 alone has a higher cost to us. Doing something in 24 also alone would probably have a higher cost to us. So our next levy renewal after 22 would be 26, right, in 4 years. So that's really the next kind of fiscally responsible time to run this levy. In that, do we think electric buses will be around in these next 4 years is something we have to guess. The other thing we also have to guess is fleets don't change overnight. We've got umpteen number of buses. How many buses do we have now?
I believe we are about 35.
So yeah, that's not going to be an overnight switchover.
Sorry.
But you know, we did do a test project for propane buses in the past with the city, and looking at the city having propane vehicles, being able to share those expenses. It seems similar could happen with electric vehicles too, especially as cities may get funding from the federal level to go green sooner than perhaps schools might. So what do we think about pilots and those type of partnerships as opposed to a full-scale lot tear out? And is there budget in either the capital projects or a transportation levy to begin moving in this direction? Clearly that is, you know, the way the world is going is electric. There's no deviation into propane or hydrogen or solar buses or anything like that. Clearly we are going electric. So what's our bet as a district in this space?
I mean, there is flexibility within both the capital projects budget and the transportation budget. If we were to want to do a 1 to 2 vehicle pilot, we could do that. It would take some significant investment to relay electrical conduits in the transportation in the bus lot, but we could do it.
Can I piggyback onto David's question? I realize you're not done answering it yet, but with that idea of a possible pilot project, if we have other capital projects ongoing, if we have other capital projects, for example, you know, a remodel of a school, or we're building a small new facility kind of thing, would it be possible to build in like a charging capacity for, say, 2 buses as part of that project, with the idea that we would just maybe have to be a little more creative about, for example, you know, the bus drives kids to, you know, IMS or whatever, drops them off and then plugs into charge there during the day and then drives those kids. You see what I'm saying? Like, just that I understand that the funding from a transportation levy can't be used to cover the costs of that infrastructure. But I'm just wondering whether maybe we could include it in one of these other projects, because I do think that this is the way that it's going. And I think that as we're all living right now with the effects of climate change, I think that there would be a fair amount of support on the island for investigating this further and trying some things out.
It's entirely possible that we could, as we're doing some of the other projects, we could take a look at it. It would significantly increase the cost of those projects. The other thing that we would wind up being concerned about is the logistics of dropping we use our same drivers for 2 routes in the morning and 2 routes in the afternoon. So leaving a bus at the school to charge, they wind up coming back to the bus lot. They have the break during the day, and then they need to come back to the building. So it creates some logistical challenges in terms of how do we get drivers to the buses, how do we get the buses moving where they need to be. Just because of time, they would have to, so we could definitely look at doing some smaller scale pilots, essentially, and we can pull that into maybe not necessarily this coming year, but the year after. We have a pretty full schedule for capital projects. We only have so many man hours that we can do to monitor these projects, and it starts to get expensive and difficult to coordinate everything that we're doing. But if we want to explore the possibilities of pilots, if we start now, that gives us plenty of time to be thoughtful and considerate for maybe a 22-23 pilot, putting in the 22-23 budget. And it gives us time to look at it and explore it and see what we need to do. And then we can even include it in the next levy platform.
Because we don't have to ask for a lot of money. We can be very targeted in what we're asking for. And I think the community would be support this if we're very intentional, like you're saying, very thoughtful about how we're going to run it. And it doesn't have to be like even buying it next year, but planning to buy it 2 years. But I just don't want to miss on the opportunity, like as now, David, that you mentioned, that anytime we run a separate levy, it will take, and we know that we're limited on human resource, it will take like the extra human resource to run the levy. So if we can run our typical levy, right, but be very intentional of what we're asking for, I think it probably a better sell for the community.
I think very much our community has supported us with the water reclamation in the new schools, all that system, the solar panels as well, the efficiencies on the swimming pool. So we've had repeated millions of dollars spent on sustainable projects and efficiency projects. And a bus pilot, electric bus pilot, seems very consistent in that regard. Sorry, Deborah, was there anything you would like to add?
Yes, thank you. I think I was speaking with Superintendent Klosky about this not too long ago, and I first of all, I totally agree with everything that everyone's saying. I'm a little bit anxious about asking people for more money right now, just because there are people that are struggling financially. I think it's a good thing to ask for. So, I'm not sold either way. I agree with frankly both sides at this point. I've reached out to one of our state senators who does a lot of legislation on environmental impacts. And I think that one thing that would help substantially is if so I think tied to this, that we would have to use capital budget or capital levy to, bonds, capital money to support the infrastructure for electric buses. Now, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So, I get what the law is, and I believe that those are the requirements. It doesn't make a lot of sense because I imagine we can use transportation dollars for gas. So if it's being used to power the buses, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And also to build the infrastructure so that we can power the buses. So I think one way, not around this, but one way to solve this issue, and clearly this was just a law that, you know, didn't adapt to the modern time of electric buses. So I think this is a place where our legislative advocacy can really do us well, to advocate that our transportation dollars be, that we be allowed to use them for a project like this, in terms of creating the infrastructure so that we can start to do the electric buses. Because like I said, I totally agree with it. You know, it's a big funding mechanism in the beginning, and then obviously not as much. I think there's also interesting to look at kind of merging. Superintendent Clark was telling me about a proposition. I think it was Prop 32 in California. That fund. I see that you're holding up numbers, but
Prop 39.
What?
Prop 39.
Prop 39 that funded solar energy for schools at a very low interest rate, and then over a 10-year period, just like people are doing here on the residential, but this was specifically for schools. And so I think those are things that I think the advocacy that needs to be done is in our state legislature to be freeing up funding so that the schools can do these things. I think us going out and doing it on our own it's just a huge risk, because it's electric buses and we know they're here to stay. But I think our legislature could be helping us out with this a lot. And we know that that's their priority too. So again, I've reached out to someone, you know, a lot of people are traveling for the summer, so I haven't heard back yet, and I'll continue to pursue that. But I like what I'm hearing.
So
That's it.
And it could very likely be a both end. So that
Right.
advocacy at the state level, that the way the transportation levy restrictions, so to speak, are written really hinders us in moving forward in a sustainable model for our transportation needs. And so can we look at locally as well as pushing on the statewide for that sustainability for school districts? As Ty and I have been having multiple conversations about this as well, when I mentioned another topic that's a hot topic right now is cooling. And I said, you know, we didn't build that into the long-range facilities master plan. That when that comes back around, we need to discuss that, because climate change has definitely dictated that cooling is really important. And Ty's first response to me was, well, here's the interesting dichotomy you're in that the state has given a mandate to schools to lower our utility usage. Putting in cooling systems is not going to lower our utility usage, but yet most schools, particularly in this region, don't have cooling systems in them. So it kind of fits in that same place of, if we are truly saying that we are environmentally aware and sustainable across the state, support that in the policies and the legislation that you're passing, versus keeping it an antiquated funding model that doesn't support new and innovative ways.
If I can jump in and maybe provide a segue as well, but so we've got the federal advocacy as well, because we have action happening right at the federal level for one-time grants and pilots that will help to build that infrastructure, which is what we're talking about here, kind of, as far as rebuilding the electric stations for the buses to recharge in. As we're talking about this, it's so interesting that we have this conversation about the restriction or contracting of our educational program, while we're also looking at spending money on transportation. And it's an important reminder that these budgets are separate and restricted, and so we can't use capital transportation dollars for education programs, and we can't use debt services. These are all separate buckets that by law can never be crossed. So I thought I'd put that back on to remind folks who are leaning and saying, well, how are you talking about spending millions of dollars here, but you have to save millions of dollars here? It's because they're restricted.
Yeah, it's part of that, part of the perceptions and complexity and confusion around school finance. It's a hard thing to wrap your head around when you have 5 separate buckets of funds that can't commingle, and you require each one to be able to succeed. But you may be struggling in one, but have plenty of resources to do other things in another. And in some ways, it's very frustrating for me as well, having my hands tied by these restrictions, because the funds are there. It would be great if we could use them in other ways, but that's the joy of school finance. And then if we go 3 slides down, the next 2 tables just represent the debt service, transportation funding, projections, no surprises for those. Limited activities in the ASB fund for 2021 meant that we have plenty of resources going into 21-22. And we believe that we'll see fairly substantial activity. Resumptions of a lot of the clubs and programs that we didn't see, higher athletic participation. We're hoping that we will see some pretty robust activity out of ASB this year. Woo! Let's hope. And so it's a fairly standard ASB budget. Last year was pretty slim because we weren't quite sure what we were going to do, but seeing the success with which we've had with athletics and activities and clubs, and the immense need for re-socialization and the social emotional learning that comes with these extracurricular activities. We're really hoping that kids lean in and participate this year. So we have a bit more robust budget for ASB. Any questions about capital tech? Well, beyond what we've already talked about, capital tech, transportation, debt service, ASB. Last rounds.
So on the ASB fund, it's about $2 million, it looks like. That's a usage-based fund, correct? So students pay into it because they're going to participate in sports, and then the teams get the money back. So it's kind of different than school foundation donations or PTA donations, which could be used more generally.
And it's really student-driven. The level of activities that students want to participate in drives the funding and the expenditures. The high school, the ASB Council has to approve all the expenditures. That's their right, that's their responsibility with the ASB fund. So it really is a student fund. It's really geared for their participation and their use. So it's always an interesting and slightly terrifying thing to be the manager over the ASB fund, just because it's the students are in charge of it. But it's also one of those things where you see it and you're just like, let's go, come on, use it.
I know there's also laws have shifted in the recent years around ASB funding and access, equitable access for all students, to ensure that no student is blocked from participating in a sport or a club or something because they can't pay the fees. So how is that covered? So the school district covers those fees, ensures that every student has equitable access to all of these great things. How do you balance that within there?
So 3 things that we consider. 1, volume. As we said earlier with school lunches, and why the high school is not part of the National School Lunch Program, and it's going back to fee-based, like paying for your food in the fall. We just don't have a significant number of free reduced students or low-income students at the high school. Second is it's group support. You modify your resources, you modify your fees to kind of help boost up a little bit and create those additional resources that you're able to use, as well as asking for other resources. Sometimes the foundation of the PTAs or the boosters will help cover sponsors, scholarships or sponsors, sponsor students as they go through. So there's opportunities. Third, I just received an email a couple days ago from OSPI about some new potential grants opening up to support ASB funds with revenue loss related to, and it's House Bill 1660 that was passed a couple years ago, to 1660 related revenue loss. So there are ways that we can deal with it. We don't believe that we're going to see a whole lot of volume in terms of which is mixed, right? If there's families that need to use it, we hope that they'll be comfortable coming to us and saying, hey, we need help, because we want our kids to participate. We want them to be part of this leaning in across the system everywhere this year. So to everyone in Mercer Island who hears the sound of my voice tonight, if you need help, please reach out to me. We want to help you. We need you to be part of this this year.
It's really important, and when we talk about lunch that's been covered, in stabilizing nutrition for students, and sometimes there's stigma attached to whatever. I think Director Din, you've talked about that before. If you need help, reach out and ask for help, because then that allows us to report those numbers as a system and get additional grants and money in to provide more assistance for that. But if we don't know what those numbers are, it's like with McKinney-Vento and homeless students, if we don't know that these students exist, if we don't know that this need is there, or we can't report that need, then we can't get the support to fill that gap. And so, yeah, you've got to let the system know exactly what you're saying. If you need help, ask for help. And
I know this is straying off, but just one last thing. We have worked incredibly hard to ensure the privacy and anonymity of these services that we provide to the students. The students' privacy is sacrosanct to us. If you need help, we will help you, and we'll do it in a way that you can feel normal, because that's a huge part.
And I'm reaching out to Deborah and Maggie Tai in case you have any questions.
No, we're good. Thanks. I saw Maggie Tyne shake her head.
Thank you.
We have one last slide that we want to make sure is kind of the send off to budget that final implications and outlook.
And as we mentioned before, we are really prioritizing our students' needs this year. We are following the district's policy and our vision of students are our priority. We are putting all of our resources in to making sure that our kids are getting what they need this year. However, that means in the next couple of years after 21, 22, we are going to have some very difficult decisions and a lot of right sizing to meet our enrollments and our staffing levels. And it's a tough situation that we're in, but it's where we are. So that's where we're looking, and that's where we're going to be headed.
I just want to make a point when Brian was saying how, and I thank you so much, Ty, for really putting the call out that we will serve all students, right? I think it's really important. And so as I'm sitting here and you say this, I think there's some students actually, even though they know that there's help, they just can't ask for help. And so I'm thinking, like, how can we as a system, instead of asking, this is enrollment fee, but kind of, I know, like, put my son in first T, and it's kind of like this is recommended payment if you can. It's a slightly shift of kind of putting information and a payment option that, of course, those who can will always pay, right? And those who can't won't, versus like this is a fee and if you need a scholarship. So just as that slight wording change will, I think will pull more people in, because culturally, even if we say that, we shout for help, it's just really difficult and it's just not within the norm. And I also want to kind of make a point, when you said right silence, I think we're all preparing, and you did such a wonderful job in laying out information. I was really trying to read your handbook, that was really in-depth and helpful. I think also, like, when we think about moving forward, it's not just right-sizing the staff, it's really right-sizing the system, right? And how staffing is really beyond teachers, and as we're thinking of, and so when I think of what we get paid for from a prototypical model, I think on page 7 that you put, of like 20 teachers, like 1 principal, those guys, I think as, if you could, like in the 4th budget, it would be helpful for me to kind of understand what is the basic education that we're providing, and what are all the extras that we're thinking are basic, right?
Yeah.
I think that really helps for the community to know, as in the levy, what they're supporting, because there, sometimes I think there's an assumption of extras as, we have accepted as a basic. So I think moving forward, those kind of education would really benefit me and the community.
And just touching last thoughts, when we send out applications for free and reduced families, really quick, we include a information release form, and it says, I am willing to release my information to have these fees or these programs waived. We then take that and then we go into the system on the back end and we waive those fees. So when kids go up to the front desk on Fee and Photo Day, it's done. They don't have to disclose to the cashier and say, I can't pay this. We just take care of it for them. And so that's that. On the flip side, I've been working over the last couple of years to build this information of what is basic ed versus what is enrichment in terms of our staff. As we move forward into this next year, and as I say, we're going to have hard conversations. We will have a lot of conversations about what is basic ed, what does the apportionment model give us, what do we staff at? Do we get 20 teachers and we have 24 teachers? Those 4 teachers will be highlighted as enrichment. I can just tell you off the cuff, we have twice the amount of classified staffing as what we are apportioning. So drivers, paras, crossing guards, support staff, secretaries. We are very richly staffed, not just in the classroom, but in the entire system. And so, as part of the discussions about next year's budget, as we're moving forward, we will be very intentional about presenting information to the board and the community about what is our basic ed, what are we at, what do we need to do.
And the figure of 50% of our classified are funded out of the local, I believe we will make sure we have the correct numbers when we come back in, because remember our levy amounts are less now, but it was about 33% that were certificated employees that were then paid for out of levy. You know, a lot of that came with, we're only staffed at 20, but we actually have 24. So the smaller class sizes are something that has always had high value in this community, and we value that as well. We know that that is better for everyone, but the state doesn't necessarily fund at that rate.
No. All right. Thank you.
So I have one last thing before you go. Oh, I'm sorry. So you've presented this draft package for us to consider and the community to consider. At our next regular meeting in 2 weeks will be a public hearing on the budget. So for those listening in, what does that really mean? And what can they do between now and the public hearing at our next regular meeting?
Between now and the meeting, if you have concerns, if you have questions, please come talk to me. You can email me, you can call me directly. I enjoy talking to the community at large. I'm a nerd, what can I say?
He loves these numbers.
I love the numbers. Please reach out to me. I'm here to help. Additionally, at the public hearing, that's the community's chance to weigh in about our priorities and our vision. If you really want your voice heard before the meeting, please reach out to me. And then we can say, you know, we've heard from so many community members that have concerns about X. But the public hearing is really the opportunity for the public to step up and say, I support this, I don't support this, we should consider changing this. But it's an opportunity for the community at large to weigh in.
The dollar amounts don't change, so it would be similar to the conversation that you just had as a board as to, well, what if we have to use capital dollars for electric bus infrastructure, what wouldn't we do? So it's that conversation, because the dollar amounts aren't going to be different, but is there a shifting of priorities? Tough to do midstream, but certainly to consider. We heard a lot today about transportation levy, and we'll go back and reconsider that, and then the board will have that discussion as they move forward in their decision on levies in the fall.
Thank you, Brian. That's a great question. And I think also we'll be doing this on Zoom, so people can participate that way. Will people be able to give feedback on Zoom as well?
We always have the public input where we ask you to, for the regular meeting, but for the linkage session, we can
definitely also say, if you're gonna be on Zoom, please let us know who you are, so we know who to call in to the meeting, so we can put that into the messaging for the linkage session.
We have the ability to promote to panelists, so if they wanted to be part of that conversation, we certainly have that.
Is that board interest in that, providing that over Zoom as well as in person? I'm sensing a thumbs up around that.
Yes.
Deborah and, yes, thank you.
Anytime.
Yeah, Maggie Ty, yeah. Okay, and I think that's great. Thank you very much, Ty. I know you're juggling a lot of balls. You probably need 2 or 3 additional hands with everything going on. So much appreciated for making this clear and understandable. And we, once again, welcome public comment. As Brian highlighted, we did not have any today, but please do either attend or send us email or give us public input at the beginning of every board meeting. So thank you very much, Ty. I think we will move on to the item number 2, C, Board Policy 1800 OE6.
President D'Souza, are you open to a brief bio? We've been at it for 2
Yes.
hours and 15 minutes.
Oh, of course. Yes, let us take a 10-minute break, or 5-minute break?
5 might be enough.
Let's take a 5-minute break and we will reconvene at 8:18. Thank you.
Aaron,
Let us know when we're back in session.
recording.
Oh, we're recording again. Okay, we are back in session after a little break. And we are ready to move on to item 2C on budgeting and financial planning on the city district interlocal agreement with school counselors. And just a reminder, because we're on a hybrid meeting, please project your voice as I think maybe we're getting a little tired and it's fading a little bit. So let's redouble so we can make sure our board members remotely can hear us as well as the community.
All right, so as before you tonight for action is our annual update on the city and district interlocal for our school counselors. Fred has been the main contact and communicator for this with his counterpart at Youth and Family Services. So I will have him briefly walk you through any significant changes that have occurred in this interlocal since you saw it a year ago. Fred.
Thank you, Superintendent Kolaski. If you kind of did a side-by-side from last year to this year, you really won't notice any major changes. We did a few updates to some timelines in terms of when the contract starts and ends for our Youth and Family Services counselors, but nothing out of the ordinary. Our contribution has continued to be $60,000. And because of some grants and the foundation through Youth and Family Services, as well as the city, we've been able to maintain the same number of counselors over time. You might recall there was a furlough last year, not last school year, I guess it was the 1920 school year, right at the end because of the hit that the city took, especially the thrift store. The funding that has been restored graciously by the city is going to continue counseling services at least for another year. So we're incredibly grateful for the partnership and look forward to another great year with our counselors.
So we do have this on the agenda for action. Does the board have any questions?
No questions from me.
And Brian, do you have anything? Would you like to start with a motion? Sure, I will start. Yeah, that sounds good. Is that for this?
I'll move that we approve the school counselor contract for the 2021, 2022 school year.
Is there a second?
I second.
And seconded by Director Din. With that, is there any discussion?
You mentioned, Deputy Director, that there were some grants involved. The recent Best Starts grants that came in through for ESPERT, is that a part of this as well? That partnership with Youth and Family Services?
No, I believe
That, go ahead, Superintendent Kolaski.
I was just going to say the grants that the city received were to be able to restore the counseling positions that the city had to eliminate because of their budget reductions due to the pandemic and the loss of revenue that they were experiencing because of the pandemic.
I would say the ESPERT portion is separate. However, Youth and Family Services counselors are instrumental in helping us to be able to fully implement the ESPERT, and we will have it at IMS and MIHS next year. So tangentially it helps, but it's separate from this interlocal.
Is there a rationale for the district to continue paying $60,000 a year if the city could pick this up as well, especially since the city has received a lot of funds for COVID recovery, and we as well I believe these come from our general budget, general fund. So have we thought about that, or is this just legacy that we continue to do this?
It's a good question. I don't have a set answer for that. Legacy is most likely part of it. We have been paying that portion of this interlocal at least for the past 5 years. It's been the same amount. It has not changed. I think I have not had a face-to-face conversation with city manager. I will see her actually next week. We are set up to meet, but I do know that Fred might be able to shed some light on that with his conversations with YFS director.
Our contribution when I was first in the district was far greater than 60,000. And due to, because of the recession, I think that's really when it went down and the city had taken a greater share. I think, I'd have to think about it more. Off the cuff, I would say there's probably an interest that we have in maintaining a certain level of contribution, simply because it signals investment in that partnership. And we have the city fields along with district fields. We have the school resource counselor, we have the YFS the school resource officer, the YFS counselors. I think it creates that certain amount of partnership and bond that is unique to our district and city that others don't. In terms of the exact dollar amount, that probably is more legacy if I just kind of think about that. But in terms of contribution, there probably is an interest that we have in wanting to make sure that we have some investment in this, just to keep that partnership. Now, with that being said, it is more than 60,000 in terms of the space in the schools. Andrea's providing technology support. I mean, they become part of our staff. So it's probably more in that sense, but I know it probably helps our overall relationship to have at least some contribution, as I see it from my seat.
Fred, you brought up a great point, and I think there's a lot of contention about who pays for these counselors. And at this time, I think as is, I think it's a good working relationship. Personally, I think it makes sense for it to be for all to on the city as well, since they're taking. It's basically a counselor who's providing services to our youth, but in the school. So we are really best practice to have this partnership. But Fred, when you're saying that they're in our schools and having also support from us, we should put in the in-kind service a dollar amount in here as well. Because otherwise, they're thinking that we're not contributing as much, but cost of office space, cost of, the utilities and support from Andrew, it's really in-kind service that should be included in this contract. To expedite this, I would just vote on it and move forward, but moving forward, I would add all those other costs in that we provide support for.
Deborah or Maggie Tai, would you have any comments?
No, not right now.
Okay, with that is discussion, Brian.
I might just put a tag on the end of it that it is an amazing program. The partnership in Interlocal is so important. Our youth and family services counselors are incredible. And even though we wish the ratios could be, one counselor to even a fewer number of students, because the ratio is still pretty overwhelming. But the fact that these services are here for our students are amazing. So I just want to have gratitude to the city for their partnership in this, to youth and family services and everyone involved. Because without this partnership, our students wouldn't have access to this service. So thank you.
Thank you, Brian. That's well said. And with that, I will look for a vote on this. All in favor, say aye. Aye. And I see 2 eyes on the screen. Against? And abstain? So we have passed 5-0 for item C, the 2021-2022 Counseling Services ILA with the city. Thank you very much. Let's move on to Board Policy 1001, Governance Commitment, Superintendent Succession. There is a slide deck that Maggie Tai will be taking us through at this time. And this is a little bit of a test to make sure hybrid meetings also are working well, and we can have people presenting as well remotely. So please, Maggie Tai, take us through this.
Okay, I'm going to wait till I see the slide deck, which right now I'm not seeing. Is anyone else seeing it?
It's coming up.
There, you should see it now, Maggie.
Aha, okay, yes, thank you. Okay, so this is, thank you to the staff who put together this slide deck, and David and I both reviewed it to give us just some starting points to begin our discussions of superintendent succession determination. This discussion, this slide deck and this discussion has the goal of talking about the timeline for making a decision on who will be the next superintendent, and for discussing the process by which we are going to make this decision. We are not going to be talking about any specific individuals. We are just going to stick really strictly to those 2 topics. So timeline and procedure, sort of process. Okay. Thank you. Next slide. Grounding our decisions. When I was going over this, I was looking at this and thinking about reflecting on how, our vision is to inspire our students to be lifelong learners, and how we're hoping to engage students in thinking critically, solving problems creatively, and working collaboratively. And it occurred to me that in how we think about and plan for this decision, we are really modeling in the most important way possible for our students how to be thoughtful about a big decision that's going to impact our community. So for everyone to just kind of keep that in mind, everyone in the community as well as everyone on the board, to keep in mind that the values, vision, and mission aren't just there to help us pick who we think the best person is for this job, but to think for ourselves about how we're modeling these principles that we subscribe to. So, okay, next. Thank you. Sorry about the barking dogs in the background. Board policy. So this is just a listing, and this is probably for the benefit of the public more than anything else. This is a listing of the board policies that govern our obligation as a board to evaluate and decide on the next superintendent ourselves. We could go through them, one by one, but I think we're all pretty familiar with them. The most important thing for people in the public to understand is that the superintendent is the board's one employee. It's our one hiring decision. And so it's very important. It's really like one of the major functions of the board, and as such should not be taken lightly. And that, then the superintendent kind of power in the district sort of cascades downward then from the superintendent, so that hire is very, very, very important to us. The RCW code item that is listed here is just the law that gives school boards the authority to make these types of decisions, to supervise and to select superintendents. And we can go to the next slide. The 2017 process, I'm going to let David talk about this a little bit since he was part of that process. But for those who haven't seen it yet, the district website has a really wonderful kind of précis backwards chronologically of exactly what was done during that 2017 search. So I really recommend that you take a look at it. And it's just at the board address. I think it's like /superintendent search, something like that. or you can just find it by Googling. I found it just now by Googling. It's very useful to take a look at. David, do you want to just kind of sum up kind of what's on this slide? And then I have some questions for Donna about thought exchange when you're done.
Sure. Thank you very much, Maggie Tai. In 2017, the board began the process of searching for the superintendent then, which ended up with the hiring of Donna Klosky. So we've been very happy with that. I will say that every board, every community is different. Communities change. And so what you did in the past doesn't necessarily reflect what you will do in the future. In the past, the board did hold special meetings and executive sessions to consider internal candidates and then external candidates, which were done in public. The board is responsible for this. So it's up to us to bring the right resources and hire the right resources to make this happen. We don't really utilize internal resources. We bring forward external resources in most cases. And so that's why we did a formal search for an external search firm who aids in this type of search. It's very specialized set of candidates, very specialized process, nuances of legal efforts around it that, no board alone would be capable of doing this without some professional help. And then a big portion of what we wanted once we've decided that route was how did we get community input? And we did do a survey. There was a great deal of discussion and thought that goes into the survey. Again, the key piece around this was identifying characteristics, identifying desires of the community before even candidate selection of any type has happened. So we really understand the breadth and depth and knowledge from the community is shared with the board, as well as anybody else who wants to participate in this, whether it's internal or external people. And I think that's something we need to consider as a board is how do we front load community input, especially in this case where this retirement is known and there's sufficient time ahead of us. And then finally, I think we've been talking a little bit about thought exchange. Before we did SurveyMonkey and paper surveys and very cumbersome to be short about it. And there's a thought now of using a software called Thought Exchange. And it has been something we've used in the past for the visioning process. So this is kind of the quick summary of the 17 process. As Maggie Tai said, you can click on the link to see more detail. But with that, I'll turn it back over to Maggie Tai to talk a little bit about this.
So about thought exchange, my experience of it is limited to before I joined the board, when the district used it for re-envisioning the values, vision, and mission statement. And I know that those of you who were on the board at the time had a little different perspective because you were kind of coming from the other side of it. So I'll just share my own experience, which was that I found it a really flexible tool. I was quite impressed by it. And for those who aren't familiar with it, it's a kind of, I'll let Donna explain a little more about it, but it's a sort of question and answer type thing. And we were given iPads at the district, but I'm sure there's a way to do it, via web as well. And there were questions asked and then people answered. And then we were allowed to see, anonymously the answers, some of the answers that people had given, and to then answer, to rate those statements ourselves. So it was kind of iterative, and it was a really neat way to see feedback kind of immediately from the community members around you. For me, that feels more modern and more flexible than the traditional kind of click 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 type of SurveyMonkey survey. But I'll let Donna explain a little bit more about it.
I can just talk to what we used before. I will say that thank you to Craig Dagginger, our communications coordinator. He was the one who created the slide deck. And I do know that he worked previously with the board in pretty close tandem in the last search as well, because communications is what he does. So he was really supportive of what the board needed in the way of communicating out their next steps. So Craig did reach out to Thought Exchange. We don't have a current contract with them, but we did have previously. And they are ever evolving, as all software are. And he came back to my office after meeting with the representative to say, oh my gosh, they've even got more tools and reports and ways to support reaching out to the community to get input than they had even a couple of years ago when we did the values, vision, and mission statement. They also shared with him that they have actually done this very same work with districts that are doing a superintendent search and support you. And I remember this support, this technical support, when Craig and I were working with them before, where they really help you with crafting your questions in a way that the community can respond to, and the reports that come out of it, it really helps you get the kind of responses that you're seeking in what's the information that you need. So as I said, we do not have a current contract with them, but upon reflection, as we reflected on last year, Craig and I both know that we have colleagues in other districts who use Thought Exchange a lot during the pandemic. And on a little bit of hindsight, could we also have used it to reach out and get that community input rather than just a survey where you then have 700 plus comments that you have to read through, rather than people being able to rate and rank, no, this is what I agree with. And then you're able to produce those reports to say, here's what the majority did rate, and here's kind of more the minority thoughts. So upon reflection, we kind of, it would have been a great tool to have had next year. It would certainly be a valuable tool in this realm, but we are already checking boxes of other ways that we could use this same license for this tool, because it can be used for just one school, it can be used for just one particular group of students or parents. So it's certainly can be community-wide, but it can be used in smaller venues as well. So that's kind of the overview of Thought Exchange.
And the cost that they quoted for the district, if we were to use it for a year, say?
24,000, which is actually the same cost when we used it a couple years back.
So I guess the first question, that's it for slides, correct? There's just a closing slide after that. Yeah. Okay. I guess the first question that, I'm sorry, I have stuff going on in the background here. The first question that I think we need to ask is what our timeline is like, so that we can work backwards from that. And very open to input from all board members. If you don't think that's the first question that we need to be asking, feel free to chime in.
Any thoughts from board members here? Right.
I'd say our timeline is fairly set forth ahead of us. We know that there's an end date. Then there's a discussion beyond that, whether it's a permanent replacement or an interim replacement, or what stuff we might use there. But we know that we have you as superintendent for the remainder of this school year.
Through July 31st.
July 31st. So this school year and a little. And then we have to have a decision made. I recall back in 2017, because I watched that process pretty closely from the community side, that announcement officially came out right around December, January. And so you were in a very truncated timeline to make that decision then, whereas we have much more time now.
That's correct, yes.
So David, you mentioned that there were different options that we can take in the hiring process. So I think the timeline is dependent on what kind of strategy we take. in the hiring process. So I think we should have that conversation first.
I think as Brian was saying, in the previous timeline, we were much more truncated. I think in this timeline with the time ahead of us, it might be helpful to seek out community input earlier than later. And we've got an option right now with an engaged community, community that's interested in the schools. We've got budget issues in front of us. We've got pandemic issues. We've got declining enrollment that we have to handle. We've got levies and bonds, and finally in February, that this is a opportune time for community engagement, and maybe front load that for sure, because that can help us decide a multitude of parts from that. And there are parts that we might not have considered previously that might emerge from community input. So there is value. Any thoughts around that? Deborah?
I think we should, I don't want to say make a decision as soon as possible, but I don't think there's any benefit in delaying that decision. I think that, we got really, really lucky 5 years ago with the delayed, with the truncated timeline that, I imagine, I wasn't a part of that, but I imagine that was kind of scary for the board to be like, oh, who's kind of left in the system. And I think that, we have a tremendous amount of superintendent openings in the state, and we can't ignore that because we're competing for the same people. And so, frankly, as well as nationwide, I don't know the numbers nationwide, but I certainly know the numbers in the state, and they're increasing weekly. And that's only going to continue to happen this year. I think that it's something that we should start on immediately. And I think for all the reasons, David, that you said, that especially with the levy, and frankly for consistency and stability for our students and our staff, to have that answer, to know where we're moving forward, I think is really important. So when we say timeline, I would say I don't see any reason to delay. I know that there's going to be arguments that 2 of our board directors are up for re-election. I just don't think it's going to benefit, though. If it's new directors that are going to get installed on the board, they don't get installed until December. And I think that that's just setting the community up for just a huge, huge risk. And like I said, we got really, really fortunate that we had an amazing, experienced superintendent from another state that wanted to be, here. With all of the options that they have now because of all the openings, that terrifies me.
Can I just chime in to say that everything I'm hearing is kind of coming together for me to say there's no reason we can't start right away in September with the listening to the community portion of this process. And if we could agree today or at an upcoming meeting on using Thought Exchange as a part of our process, we could go ahead with getting that set up and getting that started, and frankly, use it for other things as well as kids go back to school this fall. Even if we are going to hire an outside firm to help us with this process, it sounds like they would be able to make good use of the data that they're getting from Thought Exchange as well. So I guess I guess that's a 2-pronged thing. I'm saying let's start as soon as possible with the community portion of it. And I would propose that I don't know if people feel ready to vote tonight on whether or not to go ahead with Thought Exchange as one element of that.
So I agree that we should do community outreach as soon as possible. I'm really hesitant about the Thought Exchange. I think that if the district is planning to use it for other things and we happen to use it along with our search, great. But if we're spending $24,000 on like a super super Google survey or, Survey Monkey, then I think our community just want to be heard. And there are so many different ways to be heard. We have Zoom, we have focus groups, we have Google surveys. There are many ways to get information from our community. The information is not that groundbreaking. It is really, I think we know all the characteristics that we want. We just need to prioritize it. We just need to give the community an opportunity to be heard and just to reaffirm that this is the characteristic that they're wanting moving forward. But 24,000 is a lot for me.
So from my point of view, it addresses a lot of other issues with our communications, because I think, yes, there are a ton of ways for people to be heard, for sure. They can email us, they can, attend meetings via Zoom at least. They can write letters, they can talk to their site administrators. But I felt like last year we kept hearing from people that they felt like nobody was listening to them. Like people felt so urgently like they had stuff to communicate, and they felt like they weren't really being heard. And this is a way that we can kind of magnify parent voices, student voices, staff voices. And it's very kind of like, it's very kind of modular. Like you can do it for just, you can ask just principals what they want in their next superintendent, for example, and kind of analyze the results. So I wonder, Donna, if there's any possibility that we could have the thought exchange people come and do a presentation or present us with a presentation that we could all take a look at, maybe at our next meeting.
Or you could certainly set up a study session, and they would come to do that probably via Zoom. I will note, I'm looking at the email that Craig forwarded to me. One of the things that's new and different than previously is multilingual exchanges, which we both kind of went, ooh, that would have been a great tool to have had previously without us having to find our translations through staff and employing staff to do a variety of translations. Most of this work with thought exchange, the reports, all of even a majority of the analysis really comes through the software. So it takes it out of the hand of a board president or a board vice president to be having to disaggregate all of that data that comes from a SurveyMonkey or a Google survey, because the reports really self-create from the responses that the respondents put into the system. But certainly I could have Craig reach out and see what availability for a study session, and the board could hear about it as well.
I think it's also very important to recognize the sophistication of the outreach when we use thought exchange. You can select demographics that you want to send it to make sure you have heard from a whole 360-degree of your constituency. When you do Zoom, when you do a multitude of ways to collect information, you probably remember what you last heard. The intensity and the repetitiveness of the same things don't get conveyed in the same way. They cannot be analyzed in the same way. So this is a very sophisticated style of survey that is about intentionally seeking out people to make sure they comment and fill it out, which you probably will miss when you do email or Zoom-based sampling. And there is value in this type of system.
I think the hard part is getting to the people to fill out the survey or even do the thought exchange. And so it's a nice tool, but people feel heard when we actually implement what they tell us that they're concerned with. And people feel our outreach, if we actually outreach them, that even if we have this program, but we don't go out to them and we just email to them, we're still doing the same process with a really souped up system. I mean, I'm not against, well, of course it's awesome, but compared to really the purpose of what we're wanting to do is to make sure that the community, that we have a really long community engagement process, and that we're intentional in reaching out different part of community. That is something that we can do with out thought exchange, and after that, then the thought exchange would be a nice addition. So, I mean, we can talk about the cost, we can vote on it, but I'm just saying that, if I had to put money somewhere else, that would not be where I put my money.
So it sounds to me like what you're looking for is actually exactly what this software provides. And I don't have any, I don't have a dog in this hunt in any particular sense. Like there may be better software out there. I don't know. Are you comfortable, Tam, with having a presentation of some sort, like at a study session to learn a bit more about it and get questions answered?
Oh, totally. I mean, I'm always open to learn more about it, but I'm imagining the translation is like a Google translation, and all of these, just how it works, and to our, communities that doesn't speak English, having this program doesn't make them engage with us any better. So I'm just thinking the implementation of it all. But I would fully be, of course, be happy to learn more about all their functions, what they can do.
Okay, so that sounds like a good next step, Donna. I'm good. Brian, you haven't chimed in. Are you nodding your head like yes, good next step, or?
I'll say, I'm a big fan of Thought Exchange. I think it's a tremendous program. I think what Director Den is saying is how we engage with the community by using that tool is going to be really important. And that's a very separate thing than the technology used. And I know our colleagues over at Issaquah use a similar but different tool, which I've not enjoyed as much as Thought Exchange, but I don't know the full market of software out there. I thought it worked very well for us in the visioning process that we went through. And if it can be utilized in other aspects in this, while we're still in the pandemic, of getting information in a meaningful way from our community, I think that's good. Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying about it's incumbent upon us to find the community members that we need to hear from, and a tool itself isn't going to do that. But as far as tools go, I think Thought Exchange is pretty awesome.
But I do believe it's a tool that really does, especially in that, whether it's a small group setting or a large group setting, it amplifies what is, when it was first introduced, it was introduced kind of as a social media connection, because it amplifies by how many things are liked or how many things are expanded on. And so it allows you to see where are the major voices, what are the most majority of the voices concerned about, what is less concerned, what is the fewer, because sometimes we only hear from the loudest angry voice, and that might not be what everyone in the community is sensing or feeling. This allows to kind of help parcel that out.
What I loved about it is everybody had a chance to say, what is the top thing, just right off the top of your head right now, when we ask you this question, what's your response? And then the next step is everybody looks at everybody's responses, and you have a chance to go, oh no, you actually said that in a way that more matches what I thought, or, actually that's a really good point. And then you're able to evaluate there, and then you spin that through a cycle again and again. So you really begin to see consensus forming within a group, which is something that you just can't do with a SurveyMonkey or a Google form or something like that. So yeah, no, it's a wonderful tool when it's used and you've got your community together to really surface those urgent issues, those top issues, but also able to track those voices that are kind of historically left on the fringe. They're still there, and you're able to see that. So nobody's voice gets lost or drowned out in it. And yeah.
So
I'm cheering on Thought Exchange way too much.
yeah, we value your thoughts. But speaking of thoughts and valuing people's thoughts, I'm perfect. I don't want to start out this process with anyone feeling like we're like jamming, Thought Exchange down their throat. So I'm perfectly happy to do a study session and learn more about it and have further discussion on it. So do we need to vote on that, or is this a kind of thumbs up-y sort of thing?
Since it's a fairly major expense that we can't shy away from that, and the main motivating thing right now is the superintendent search. And there's an expectation that these searches, as I said earlier, are not free. We have to be prepared to spend time and money on it. So it's appropriate for the board to vote on this and incur this expense. This will not be the first. Sorry, this might be the first, but it will not be the last.
So, sorry, I understand that we'd have to vote on whether or not to just go ahead and purchase Thought Exchange, but do we need to take a vote on pushing this to a presentation at a study session? Or can that be a thumbs up, thumbs down?
Thumbs up is fine for a study session.
Okay, so I'm sensing a thumbs up from everyone. Deborah, yes? Thumbs up, thumbs down.
I'm not opposed to it. I don't know that it's necessary. It's sounding to me like there's a huge majority who supports it. And unless I'm misunderstanding, what I'm hearing from Tam is, like, I think David's, I don't know, someone said exactly what Thought Exchange should do. So I'm a little, I don't want to take too long talking about Thought Exchange. If it's something that can be set up quickly, and, we're starting school, it's a busy time of year. Obviously we have to make good decisions, but I think that, I don't know.
Sorry to cut you off. I think it wouldn't hurt us to learn more about it anyway, because if we are planning to use it throughout the year to hear from parents and to hear from students and so forth, like, we're going to need to learn more about it anyway. So I don't see any harm in doing a study session on it.
Fine.
Fair. Okay. We'll take that as a thumbs up-ish. Okay, so that's one topic, Thought Exchange. The next question is, do we look into hiring a firm to help us with this process? It sounds to me from what David has said and everything that I've read, and I have been reading a lot about superintendent searches and decision-making processes this summer. It does not sound like something that we can handle 100% by ourselves as a board. So then the question becomes, what's the process? David, how did you guys pick a firm last time?
I will say that we spent a great deal of time prior to hiring anybody to come to a common consensus around that, just a common nail down the timeline some more, understand the community input some more, whether that's needed or not, understand from that what type of search firms we needed to hire. There are a multitude of search firms with different focus, and I wouldn't, we had a lot more data that allowed us to pick that focus, just because we actually were doing bi-weekly study sessions. So is that twice a week?
There's a lot of study sessions.
And the public was invited to them, and the board members would be able to have just foster discussions around this. Meeting notes would be taken and summarized at formal board meetings, which went into the data report we saw that you can click on, and action would be taken at board meetings regarding purchasing and things like that. But coming to that common understanding just depends on the cadence we want to have and our time availability to be able to do these regular board meetings. Also to Deborah's point, in 2017, when we selected a superintendent, there were 2 board members who were leaving the board at the time, yet we still selected a superintendent. We did have a compressed timeline, as Maggie Tai mentioned. We were very concerned about that. That really did scare us. But in the end, I don't think we lost anything from having a compressed timeline either. So there's many things that can be navigated here. Again, I think every board is different. Every community is different. We didn't have a levy in front of us. We didn't have a pandemic. There were lots of differences then and now. So again, I think the cadence of study sessions that allow us to talk through these issues, it's not linear, and come up with a more comprehensive schedule might help us.
Okay, that's helpful. And just to be clear, from what I understand, that hiring a firm to help us if we decide to do that does not necessarily commit us to hiring a firm to conduct a search. We could hire a firm to just kind of coach us through the process, like a consulting firm that does this. Is that correct? I actually can't see you, David, because of just how no, it's not your fault. It's how I have my screen set up. There you go. Now I can see you.
Sorry, I was kind of looking to Donna. We didn't go down that route, so I don't know.
I have mainly experience with search firms, but I imagine that there are consultants who would come in and work with the board as an entity to perhaps walk them through process.
Yeah.
Might have to do some searching to find who those consultants might be.
Right.
And that is something we could discuss during a study session, and or what we've done in the past is have a subcommittee of the board go find data around this and bring it back to communicate. Sorry, Brian, you have your hand up.
No, thanks. I was going to say that the other thing I would be interested in is having an open conversation with some folks who could really put into perspective the environment right now. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We're in the middle of a recession. We're a mass exodus of superintendents and job openings. I mean, there's so many things at play right now that really shape the reality of the world in which we're trying to make this decision. And I think maybe a little bit of time dedicated for us and the community to have a shared understanding of what that reality is, I think would be beneficial as a part of this early process.
So that sounds like another topic for another study session. And going back to the timeline, I never kind of really weighed in on the timeline. I also am in favor of certainly making this decision in the first half of the school year, because I do feel like in the current, from what I know of the current environment and kind of economy out there, it's not really fair to push the decision. If we have the capability of making the decision this fall, it's not really fair to push the decision out till the very last possible moment in the spring. It's not fair to candidates. It's not fair to our existing administrators. It's not fair to the district and to the principals and the teachers who need to know what direction the district is going to be going, especially since we are still in a pandemic and a lot of things are still uncertain. So for me, I would really like to have this decision made within the first half of this school year. I don't know how other people feel about that.
I support that. It's very consistent with a lot of universities that search that people know usually by January where they're going for the next year. So starting September, October, I think what David you're saying is like we need to really hear from the community and then talk within ourselves to kind of build the schedule instead of jumping into the details right now. And as we're hearing from the community, we can decide, and if we're having problems, then we can hire consultants. I wouldn't jump to hiring consultant as a first go, but you know, we're smart people. I think that if we listen to our community, I'm sure we can, you know, put together a schedule and a process that will work for our community. So let's just start, you know, maybe set not bi-weekly, but maybe weekly study session with each other to start this, like how do we plan out maybe the next 3 community outreach events. Start something small.
So I'm on board with certainly at least a weekly study session if we can figure out a time that works for everybody. But I'd love to hear suggestions for topics for that study session. Like we've already got one on thought exchange. We've already got one on the current climate in the education world, as Brian suggests. What are other topics that people would like to talk about to kind of get this conversation rolling?
I think what type of feedback we want to get from the community will be pretty clear, what type of questions we want to ask them. So whole session could be done on that, maybe perhaps multiple. Also, I love the way Donna and her team went out to specific groups to solicit feedback on the mission, vision, and values. How do we as board members want to go out to specific groups and solicit feedback to make sure all voices are heard? So I think that would clearly be a study session. We could do a study session around communication and how do we want to, what's our process for communicating amongst ourselves, amongst the community, and memorializing this on the website, similar way we've done in the past. But those would be quick next steps.
Deborah, do you have any thoughts about topics that you'd want to hash out in these kind of sessions? No? Tam, other topics? Sorry, one second, I just have to open it. Sorry about that. It was sit and get my door destroyed or get up and open the door for the dog. Okay, so that sounds like a good start. And at our first study session, we could also come up with other ideas, and you guys can be thinking about it in the meantime as well. I guess I would suggest a study session towards the end of this series that's been proposed to learn more about the options that are out there in terms of consulting firms and the potential costs. From what I've been finding, all of which is pre-COVID, papers and studies and so forth, the costs of hiring, if we wanted to do a national search, which we don't necessarily want to do, can run from $150,000 to $300,000, which is a very high cost for. It's a lot to be thinking about spending in a year when we've had to, close down the elementary school Spanish program, for lack of funding. Sorry, hang on one second. Sorry. Like that, but those prices are all pre-COVID, right? So that probably involves a lot of, flying back and forth from Chicago kind of thing, right? And it's possible that in the current climate with everybody so Zoom friendly that maybe those costs aren't as high anymore. So I don't want to have the straw man of, oh, a search would be astronomically expensive if that turns out not to be the case. So that for me would be another topic, would be for a study session, would be to look at what are the benefits of hiring a firm and what are the costs potentially. I'm seeing nods. I'm going to add it to my list. Okay. I feel like it's already been a long meeting. We've still got more stuff to do. So this has been a good start to this conversation. And I think we have some next steps. Is there anything else that people would like to talk about before we move on to the next item? Okay, thank you. Turning back over to you, David.
Thank you, Maggie Ty. This is a great start. Thank you very much. Super productive. Wow. Okay. Let's move on to item 2E, board policy 1008P on the board calendar, the first reading.
So this reflects the discussion the board had in June at their study session on the changes that we made. Some of it's based on, of course, we went from 7 fundamentals to 5, so some of it's based on that. Some of it's based on changes were to some linkage and the pattern and flow. This is again a first reading. We had a discussion at your June study session, and this is a first reading for final approval at your next meeting at the end of August.
So I just had one question about the calendar, and that is that there are a lot of like PTA, I don't know, linkage sessions on there, and I'm just wondering if someone has already checked to make sure that there's no conflicts with events at those schools or at those sites,
So those are reinstituting after the pandemic are school site visits where the board meets at a school site. Director Tucker and Director Din, I can't even recall if you got to experience one of those.
We got to go on two. We got to go, I think, to the high school and to IMS. Yeah.
Right. So every one of those meetings always includes a time for the board to meet with students, a time for the board to meet with parents. And the parent portion of that is always coordinated by the site PTA. And there, of course, is also a time always built into it for the board to meet with staff. You should start with the staff in the morning and meet and greet, and you get to meet with them. Then classroom visits. Sorry, I forgot about meeting with the administrative team at the site. Classroom visits, meeting with student panels, and then usually the final part of the day is meeting with the PTA parents. That's why those are linkages. That's a time for the board to hear from our different groups of parents as represented by each of the sites.
Super helpful. Thank you.
Any other discussion? One proposal, if people are interested in this, could we put this on the consent agenda for the next time? If there are no thoughts around updates or changes, and have that be pro forma approval. Brian?
No, I'm great with moving on to the consent agenda. I was just gonna say, so I recently attended a conference, an equity conference, where a student panel came in. And once again, time and again, I'm hearing student panels saying, we want more time with the board. We want more time to have conversations and to provide input to the board. And I know that we've got some select times in there. It's usually somewhat truncated when we do our site visits. And it's usually a small group of students, but maybe as we plan towards June and the board improvement plan, but looking at ways that we could engage in a less formal way with students. One board director, Michelle Perry, said that they do breakfast at their schools once a month, where it's an informal breakfast and students are there and mingling, the board is there, and there's be able to be some small group discussions and one-on-one discussions, and just an opportunity for students to be able to approach board members and share their thoughts in a less formal setting. So maybe as we think about that with future calendaring and opportunities, I said I would bring that forward from that workshop.
I love that idea.
And maybe not always breakfast, but so often, and it's hard to do now because we're in a pandemic, but when there's food, people come. Like there's something about food and community and bonding. But other than that, I think this calendar is great.
Okay, we'll put it on the consent agenda. Thank you. With that, we will move on to 2F, Board Policy 1605, Monitoring Superintendent Performance. And this is a reflection of the changes for fundamentals, but at a high level, legally, this is how a board monitors the superintendent, and the law requires us to be upfront with the criteria that we are monitoring our superintendents and how we're going to do it. This is our board policy that satisfies the RCW around this. So Donna, did you have any?
I think you said it all, David. It really just reflects the change that the board made to the fundamentals last year. And so you can see that reflected in right at the bottom section of the 1800 operational expectations. And I do love that operational expectation 1 is student-focused fundamentals.
I don't know if this is an appropriate conversation here, but I know that we talked about monitoring. How do we take from what the board policy to what the superintendent interpretation And then I feel like there's a gap in how do we actually monitor metrics, benchmarks. I don't know when you said like, this is our legal contract, what we're putting out here, do we need to get more explicit? So, or, because when I look at, I think that the next agenda item, it shows kind of, where the superintendent, where she's in compliance. But when you look at it, there's a lot of, we talked about this and we were gonna have a discussion on about making our monitoring reports, more benchmark like, or even have that conversation. Because right now it is all good, but it's hard to track to see what we're doing now. Is it really having long-term systemic outcome? I don't know if it's appropriate here or if it's another conversation or it should be better placed somewhere.
Good. Any other thoughts before any response can be given? So from my perspective, this is the overall contract we have with the superintendent of each of the fundamentals. Inside each fundamental is the review and the metrics. And when we update a fundamental, after we monitor a fundamental, we then have an opportunity to update the fundamental in any perspective, whether it's language, whether it's metrics, whether even if the superintendent's interpretation can be updated at that time. So usually we have that discussion then on the specifics of each fundamental. We went through the part of condensing some fundamentals, updating them, worked on the metrics around fundamental 4. And I do agree sometimes when we approach these things, it's hard to know if you're making systemic change or not. It's cumbersome. And so we've done some updates for the surveys we do, but again, it's trial and error in many of these cases. Trial, error, refresh, and try again. And hopefully sometimes we succeed too. Certainly some things have done very well. Other things, as you get better, you get more questions, and so you want to raise the bar again. And that's a great position to be in. But I think that discussion should happen either at the fundamental level, or if we want to do something kind of more broader in a study session, that's also another opportunity. So any thoughts around that from board members? Brian?
I don't want to jump the line if everyone's cool. Yeah, I think the sandbox of authority, right? So the board has the authority really on behalf of the district, but by RCW, which we talked about earlier, it really states very specifically in the revised Code of Washington that the board will hire a superintendent and the superintendent will drive the branches of the organization. They don't use the term branches, but it's pretty specific language within the RCWs. But so in that, we have the fundamentals here and the operational expectations. And that's where in the sandbox, you draw all those different, you set those executive constraint and here's where your focus is, here's where the board's focus is. And you can shift those lines as appropriate each time you do the language review, as David was talking about. So every time we review language of an OE or a fundamental, we look at the metrics and we can change those metrics, we can change the parameters. I think if you're looking at like setting a short-term or long-term reach goal, say we want to reduce this gap in achievement by X% over X number of years, which gets pretty specific. And I think with work through a study session, you could come to terms with your leadership team and maybe set a goal like that. And the superintendent does that all the time in the school improvement plans and the district improvement plans, the SIPs and the DIPs. But the board doesn't set those. We kind of say, okay, I see where you're tracking with that. But that's really the superintendent handles it and the principals handle that. I think if the board were to want to set a reach goal with the superintendent, I think this is the policy where we would look at, it's under this policy, I think, that we would look at setting some sort of a reach goal or something, because this is really mapping out for the next year. Here's what we're gonna monitor on. And then we can pull up those monitoring reports from the past year to see, here are the metrics that were done. We've already set all the language and the metrics around these things, right? But I think, what I think I'm hearing you say is, how can we set a big goal that we can match over a couple years with a set expectation or goal that we hit that mark or we don't hit that mark. But if we're not setting that mark, we're not reaching for that mark, then we're not going to get there. And I think this is the policy where we would do that. But it I think requires some really intentional, thoughtful work in the leadership team to set that together.
I know it's a big thing, but and we've been lucky with Donna, but as our board, we have to think about creating a system that if there is anybody in this position that, you know, when we're so loose with our interpretation or the way it will make that a lot of things will be in compliance. They really have to go off the mark. Like when we're looking at how we measure, or you know, to be off of compliance. And so it's yeah, I'm just thinking about how can we make the system, you know, more accountable so that people can see, you know, the benchmark and what we're trying to reach. Otherwise, it's, you know, everything seems anecdotal, right? And so but it requires a longer conversation that we can go back to, but I'm just wondering if it belongs here or belongs somewhere else.
I think that would be I think we'd be have a discussion around what things we want to achieve, and then see how it fits. I think there's also, setting goals is I don't have to say it's very difficult, obviously, as we found even in creating these. So I think it would be a discussion that we as a board agree we want to move forward with, and then we could do similar study sessions or discussions around it, and then take formal action in a board meeting. But it would be the board to decide it wants to take this on, just like it is up to the board to decide how it takes on the superintendent succession plan.
Yeah, I'm okay with having a later conversation. I just want to bring that up.
Okay, fair enough.
And if I can, I look across at the superintendent, and so the superintendent also has a say in that, because it's changing the parameters of the sandbox and the work agreement between the parties. And so the superintendent may say, yeah, no, that's not what I agreed to. It's really changing that scope. So as we're looking into a superintendent succession plan, I could see that this would be a part of that negotiation with the next step. Obviously, we're not going to shift that on you, Donna, right now.
Well,
But that's a big rock to move and a really important one.
And I do want to point out that as the board discussed in their study session in June, that in June of 22, sorry, what year are we in? There is included under that board study session that always occurs in June. It has 100 board policy 1002, which is your reflection, your policy governance, and added per consensus of the board improvement plan for a BIP. So now you've got DIP, SIP, and a BIP, where you talked about what would the board be looking at as a governance team in moving forward as well. So just to point out that is there too. And of course, any policy change does take full consensus of the board.
Okay, on item F, monitoring superintendent performance first reading. If nobody thinks there are going to be any updates on this, I suggest we put this on the consent agenda as well. And if anybody has any discussion or comes up with something over the next 2 weeks, you just have to ask for it to be removed and we will pull it and we can have that discussion. So do I see a thumbs up on consent agenda?
Yes.
Okay, looks great. Thank you. So let's move to item 3, post-monitoring language review of Fundamental 4. And this is the monitoring report of Fundamental 4. It gives us an opportunity to look at the quantitative data and what surveys we use to drive it, as well as the language to give any updates to it. So this is actually directly an opportunity, Tam, to see if on Fundamental 4 there are any changes. Though I believe this is the one we went through multiple sessions to close on this one. So if there's any discussion here, let me know.
I would just say, so I leaned into this because July, and I started monitoring it because I didn't pay attention to its language review. So I began going through everything bit by bit again, as if I was preparing to monitor Fundamental 4. No, we did a lot of work setting this up. I think that these are going to change over the years as we begin to look at it. And that's one of the big things is when you set data, it needs that time to be observed. So I'm excited to see some new things coming in here and how this is kind of folding out with language review. And I really appreciate that the monitoring report is here included in the language review. So thanks for that.
I see no changes, so let us move on to the next item. This is item 3B, Board Policy 1800 OE10 on the instructional program language review. And do we have any thoughts around updates or changes to that? And going once, going twice, I'm seeing none. So with that, let us move on to item 4, the consent agenda. Do I have a motion for the consent to approve the consent agenda?
Motion to approve the consent agenda as published.
And a second?
Second.
And Tam seconded. With that, any discussion? All in favor of the consent agenda, say aye. I see 5 ayes. Any against? None. And any abstains? None expected as well. So with that, the consent agenda is approved. And we will move on to item 5, the superintendent's report.
So just some announcements. It's August. School's going to start soon. So I want to make sure you know some of the important events that are coming up. First of all, our new teacher orientation, and we'll be sending an invite out to you to see if you'd like to come and be present when we and meet our new teachers. On the 2 dates are August 23rd and 24th, but I'll give you more details in the update as to time and whatnot to come and meet them. And then we have our annual full school district, what we call our Tech Integration Day, which previously has had a great big barbecue pre-pandemic where the board came and helped serve. I mean, it's going to be a little different this year on the 26th, but we are still going to provide lunch for our staff, but it's going to be at the sites. So I'll be sending you further information about that if you'd like to help and support perhaps delivering lunches at one of the sites so you can have an opportunity to see staff when they're coming back for the new school year. And then the next day is our professional development day. And then August 30th and 31st, finishing out the month of August, are our pre-service days leading up to the first day of school on September 1st. Not that anyone's excited, but I am so excited. So I'll give you more information in the update, but I wanted to make sure you heard those dates. That's all I have.
Thank you very much. With that, let's move on to the ledge report. Tam, you have?
I have not. I've been, I think Ryan emailed me something and I haven't read it yet, but I don't have anything right now.
Okay. No worries. I appreciate that. And with that, announcements, inquiries, and reports from board members. I will start with Deborah.
You caught me off guard. I really don't have anything. I just, it was really, frankly, nice and refreshing to be able to take some time off in July, and I hope everyone did for reinvigoration. And I think most of you know this, if not all of you, but I am home today because I contracted COVID. And I just want, the reason I say this is, number one is I think one of the things that is holding us back, and this is just my opinion, I'm not a healthcare provider, is the stigma that is attached to having COVID at this point, and kind of the finger pointing and blaming, like, where'd you get it? Where'd you get it? We have no idea where we got it. Myself and my entire family is fully vaccinated. As soon as the county public health said wear masks inside, we wore masks inside. We sort of went back to life as normal, but we really didn't. I mean, it was still barely restricted. As far as I know, all of my friends are vaccinated, or at least everyone that I spend time with is fully vaccinated. And fortunately, it is helpful to know that no one that we were around got COVID, and they were all fully vaccinated, and we weren't all wearing masks, mostly outside in the last couple of weeks, but still. So the reason I say that is I'm really, really optimistic that we can keep this from spreading. But I think that one of the ways that we need to do that is to make sure that, my family at least has done everything that we have been instructed to do. So, it sucks that we got it. And as soon as we found out, we stayed home. And I think we actually found out pretty early. But if we're not communicating, and I know the school has restrictions on privacy, I'm not suggesting we violate any of those. But as far as the community goes, the more people can know what's happening with others around them, the less stigma, and the less hopefully people will, take responsibility and stay home. And quarantine like they're supposed to. The good thing is my daughter, who was also positive, was at a sports practice the day she got a positive test, because she didn't have any symptoms at all. And not a single kid was, has shown up positive, and there certainly has been the time frame. So that's awesome. And all those kids were vaccinated. And like I said, I'm just sharing it because I think that we're kind of in for a little bit of a rocky road this fall, but I'm optimistic too. So I know that, I don't know if you guys have all seen the email that we've gotten from board directors in other areas asking us to oppose the governor's mandate for masks in our schools, but it's crucial. And it hasn't been the biggest deal in the world. I kind of feel lousy, and it's been over a week, but I'm not in the hospital. So anyways, I just wanted to share my experience, and that's it. So I'm just hopeful that we have put so many protections in place that our students and staff are going to be as safe as possible, knowing that we're going to have breakthrough cases, and that we just have to deal with it. That's it. And I'll hopefully see you in person in 2 weeks.
And I'd like to just, my topic kind of follows very logically on that, which is I would like us to start thinking about how well we feel like this hybrid meeting format has worked. I've been pleasantly surprised tonight. Once we worked out the audio issues, I feel like I'm in a meeting with all of you. Like, I haven't felt like I couldn't hear anybody. So it's worked better than I thought it would, but as the fall goes on, in addition to COVID, there's just going to be the normal, routine kid viruses, one of which my kid is sick with tonight, which is why I'm not there, because we're all being extra careful. And if you have someone with symptoms that might be COVID-like, you're not going to want to show up at a meeting with your colleagues. So just something to think about. I have reached out to WASDA to ask if they have any guidance for us on this. Like, what happens if, say, 4 of us have to Zoom in and there's only one board member there in person? At that point, should we convert it to an all Zoom meeting, for example? So I'm not necessarily looking for an answer tonight, but just for everyone to start thinking about like what their comfort level is and what they think the right thing is to do, because I think we are going to have to come up with a policy sooner rather than later on what's the tipping point for not having a hybrid meeting or not having an in-person meeting. And what's our legal responsibility? Actually, that's a question for Aaron. What's our legal responsibility in terms of public access? Like if as of the afternoon of the meeting, all 5 board members are quarantined at home, do we still have to have a physical meeting that people can attend in person? So at some point, I'd love to get an answer to that.
Give us some time to research and we will certainly send that information out.
Thank you.
But I think you've already reached out to probably the best source right now, which would be WASDA.
Okay, that's it. That's my only thing.
And I will echo the importance of this. I think that Delta variant, is getting vaccinated people, just like we've heard here. And we need to be prepared. So, I thought this worked really well. I would have appreciated, I think Maggie Tide could have run as president actually, once the audio issues were fixed. So I'm actually also not against having the president on video and people present here. I think that would work very well. And yeah, so I think our opportunity to be flexible on this would be good, and to know our flexibility. So, and Brian, do you have any reports?
Of course I do.
Thank you.
I always do. So on the 13th and 14th of July, I attended the NSBA Equity Symposium. Because everything's virtual this year, they did 2. And the Symposium West, I'll be mentioning later, which is actually for that, the 3rd one of the year. But I walked away with a really great quote from this. And the speakers were about aspiring to heal, stories from the field, actions for inclusion, unfinished learning, a crisis with a solution was great, and a really fabulous one, using data for equity. But the quote I walked away from with this one was, diversity is being invited to the dance, inclusion is being asked to dance. And that's from Verna Myers. And I just thought that's a beautiful way to really separate between diversity and inclusion. And I walked away with so much from that, but I really enjoyed that quote. We continue, we've picked up our work now, Deborah and I, with the Eastside King County group. We had a great conversation with county council members. We had office folks from Chair Balducci's office with us, as well as Councilwoman Kathy Lambert. And we talked a lot about the Best Starts for Kids and Proposition 1 that just passed, and KC. And we continue to tell the story that using the federal model or even the state average income or cost of housing does not represent the true need of students and families in Eastside King County. And we don't want to take anything away from schools who need supports, additional supports, because they're mitigating high poverty. But the fact is, we have families that are really struggling here right now, and our systems can't support them because we don't have access to the grant money that we need to support them. The big thing that we heard back from them, we talked about SBIRT was something that Mercer Island has received 2 grants now, very small grants, but they're great. And the comment we heard back as they're moving these new Best Starts for Kids grants and other grants at the county level is that be really creative with grant applications. Even if you think it doesn't fit the model, make a case for why you should be getting the money. And because they have a surplus of money right now that they need to be told how to spend. So, and a lot of times it's going to require working with our community organizations, community-based organizations, CBOs, like Youth and Family Services. They're the ones that are actually going to receive the grant, not our schools, but how we partner with them. So I think our counseling program is a great example of that. But I just want to let you know, Deborah and I are continuing to have that conversation with them. And then this last Friday, we'll meet with them tomorrow morning, but last Friday was with Seattle King County Public Health. with updates to quarantine protocols. And there's a line in the new protocols that say test to stay, and that nobody knows exactly what that means. So if that comes up, there's some things in the mitigation that say test to stay in school, test to stay in your program or in athletics, but nobody really knows what that means or how that would be funded or anything. Let's see. Anyone who's been infected in the last 3 months and recovered can follow the same protocol as a vaccinated individual, which was something new from the guidelines that came out. And they're continuing to just unpack the testing highlights in the document and the guidance that came out. So even Seattle King County Public Health right now is trying to fully make sense of what just came out from the CDC and from the Washington Department of Health. But it's great to connect with them and moving forward with that group. Let's see. Oh, something interesting for us to discuss maybe as a future topic, not that we don't have a surplus of topics to discuss right now. I got to take part in a statewide panel, well, a director area 2 panel through WASDA concerning dress codes. This was a group of students, the Giselle Becker, Maddie Ing, Sadie Lovejoy, Viga Zringli, and Tim Owens, who talked to us. They're from the Seattle Public School District, but they're talking about trying to get a unified dress code as part of the law in Washington State. And it's specifically trying to destigmatize the treatment of females who are often told what they can and what they cannot wear, and that it's their responsibility to dress a certain way in order to change boys' behaviors or whatever, that they're being told they're a distraction. A really excellent group that talked to us about that, and they're making recommendations. The legislative person that attended that was, who were we with? It was Representative Gregerson and Bailey. So they're going to work around comprehensive student safety and ask that I push for us when we're considering prioritization to put that towards the top of our prioritization with WASDA, with the ledge prioritization of comprehensive student safety, which would be advocating around things like dress codes. And then encouraged us to look into North Shore's policy, because I think have a pretty strong policy right now. So as we're looking at our own policies around dress codes and stuff, and I pulled up ours of maybe even us as a leadership team can set a standard there that doesn't give as much burden to young women and trans students. But we can make a big impact with our policy changes at the highest level there. Ledger Up Learns continue to happen. Anyone can lean into those. Mastery-based learning have been the big topics, and dual credit, understanding dual credits. And those are all recorded, so you can go back and see those from WASDA. And then some upcoming things. There's a Modern Governance Summit. You all should have received an invitation from that. And that's through, is it Diligence, which is the company that does board docs. So it's offering a 2-day summit on governance and how to get the full work out of that. General Assembly is coming up. That's the email I sent you. So it's time to book rooms and travel for that. And so all the information is there for you on that. One registration is free for the district. And I will be there at the cost of WASDA because I'm part of the legislative committee. So I mentioned the Equity West Symposium from NSBA. So far, they're planning that to be in person October 22nd and 23rd in Oklahoma City. So there's limited space for that. And then the last thing I'll mention is the Decolonizing Education Conference of 2021. It's hosted by the Equity and Education Coalition, which is a great group. And those are going to be Wednesday, November 3rd, Friday, November 5th. And they've got some early bird registration for that. If you're interested, you can find them online in Equity for Education Coalition. That's it for me.
Thank you very much, Brian. Next up, Cam, do you have anything for us?
No, Brian made me feel guilty. I've just been having fun this summer, hanging out with my boys, and I'm so excited to return them to their teachers soon.
Thank you very much, Cam. Yeah, same here. I been hanging out with my kids as well. Did a couple trips with them, so that's been great. But I would echo to the community to please think about budgets, levies coming up, any feedback around that. And as you also heard, our superintendent search process and timeline is being considered. So if you've got any feedback around that, please feel free to share. We're not at candidate selection or anything like that. We're still very early in these items. So appreciate any community input around this. And that is all I have. So with that, oh, sorry, Brian.
I'm sorry, I'll mention just one more thing. It has to do with General Assembly because it's the prioritizations. So they'll release the full handbook for everyone to review 30 days prior, which puts that handbook release right just before our next regular meeting, which really won't give us time to really, as a full team, to do it. You can look at all the previous permanent and legislative positions. But the new ones won't be released for another 2 weeks probably. And then there'll just be that next meeting in August and then the first meeting in September before General Assembly, which is the 24th and 25th of September. And this is also announcing that I will not be at that board meeting that week because I'll be in Spokane. So,
Thank you very much. And we will look forward to enumerating the priorities for our legislature at that time too. So with that, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion we adjourn.
Seconded.
Thank you very much. We've got a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And against? I expect none, and abstains, I expect none. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you very much for a productive meeting this evening.
Thank you, David, for stepping in.
Thank you.